politicians. They've had me to their homes. They've introduced me to their children. I'd become their best friends in many instances. They've asked for my endorsement, and they always wanted my money. And even called me really a dear, dear friend. But then, suddenly, decided when I ran for president as a Republican that I've always been a no-good, rotten, disgusting scoundrel. And they totally forgot about me. In my former life, I was an insider. I knew these false attacks would come.
The president's been so unfairly attacked in the media.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh,
I knew this day would arrive. It's only a question of when.
And I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord,
Nobody knows the system better than me.
well, if you told me you were drowning, I would not lend a hand.
Now I'm being punished for leaving
I've seen your face before, my friend,
the special club.
but I don't know if you know who I am.
I'm a wartime president. This is a war.
Oh, well, I was there and I saw what you did.
I was a very
I
consequential
saw
president.
it with my own two eyes.
Maybe even more so this time.
You can wipe off that grin. I know where you've been. It's all been a pack of lies.
I am your justice.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight.
I am your voice.
Oh Lord,
I am your retribution.
and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, well I remember, don't worry.
My first term, I disrupted all of it. Oh, did I disrupt?
How could I ever forget? It's the first time,
That was called major disruption.
the last time we ever met. But I know the reason why you keep your silence up. No, you don't fool me,
I will fight for you.
'cause the hurt doesn't show, but the pain still grows. It's no stranger to you and
And
me.
I will win for you.
I can feel it coming in the air.
Fight, fight, fight.
And I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life.
We won. The operation's over.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Underground. Today is March 12th, 2026. Thank you so much for joining me, folks, to discover the truth beneath the surface. As always, I really do appreciate everybody out there taking the time to listen. And tonight, after about a month, I'm very honored and blessed to sit down with my good friend Dave from News Treason once again. Certainly, we have a lot to discuss tonight, and these conversations are really special to me. I know they are to Dave as well. We have a long history of working together and sharing ideas and navigating this fifth generation war together. So I am honored once again to welcome you back, Dave. How you doing tonight, brother?
Good to see you, brother. I think this week is roughly about 2 years since we ever did our first podcast together. So
Man, time flies, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. And what a ride it's been, my friend. And yeah, I think it's been 3 weeks or a month or so since the last time
Yep.
we got together. And I know it's probably cliche. We probably say it every time, but those few weeks feels like about a year. The kind of stuff going on. Talk about narratives converging, right? It's crazy.
It really is crazy, man. I say it all the time. It feels like we get a month's worth of news in a day, sometimes in a half a day. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. We sit down, we have a conversation, we get all caught up, and then 24 hours goes by, and it's almost like there's a whole new slate of topics to get into. And last week, I had to take a little bit of time off for personal reasons. We were supposed to have our Thursday meeting, but we're back in the saddle tonight, folks, and I'm going to bring you guys a really excellent show. And like I mentioned, obviously, there's a lot going on. There's quite a bit to cover. The situation in Iran really has taken center stage as of late. We were focusing on Epstein, and they put that seemingly on the back burner temporarily. And a lot of us were a little bit surprised initially when we woke up, I think it was a couple weeks ago now on a Saturday morning with the news that Iran was under attack by Israel and the United States. We'll get into that tonight. But it's been quite the spectacle. It's still ongoing, obviously. And amongst other things, we're now seeing the narrative deployment about the activation of sleeper cells. So we can certainly break that down. There's a whole myriad of different topics pertaining to Iran that we can discuss. And as usual, I'm curious to hear your take on what's really going on beneath the surface. Dave brings it to us better than just about anybody out there. And of course, your thoughts about where this might be headed. Certainly seems to me like it could go in a multitude of different directions, depending on how these script writers unfold the drama, as we often say. So that's going to be one segment, I guess, we can get into. And then in addition to that, we also have a whole bunch of other psyops that are ongoing at the same time that we're keeping our eyes on, including the Epstein drama, revelations about 2020 that John Solomon is forecasting is just over the horizon. So no shortage of topics for us to delve into tonight. But as always, Dave and I like to let the conversation flow in whatever direction it goes. We start talking and then we take our cues from one another, pun intended, I suppose. And it always ends up being an interesting exchange of ideas. So I'm looking forward to another great one tonight. And we're going to cover the domestic, geopolitical, and possibly the financial theater of this fifth generation war. So be sure to smash that thumbs up button, folks, if you haven't already. Regardless of whether you're watching on News Treason or on my channel. Obviously, there's a lot of crossover there. Like Dave mentioned, we have quite a history together. So with that said, I thought maybe we could begin tonight with the macro big picture analysis, given the fact that there are so many narratives that are rapidly accelerating, different storylines that are converging, like you mentioned a moment ago, as the operation unfolds. And it seems to me that we're steamrolling toward an inflection point where the floodgates are going to open, as Q assured us they would after many years of the drip, drip, drip. We're finally getting into that very interesting phase of the operation. Not to suggest that it's going to be over on any specific timeline, but we can certainly sense that there is something in the air. We can all feel it, and very, very exciting. So with that said, why don't you give us some of your thoughts on the proverbial 40,000-foot view to kind of set the stage tonight? And then we can dive into some different scenes that we're watching play out in this scripted movie. So pass it over to you, brother.
Yeah, man. Something we were kind of discussing a little bit backstage that you and I have talked about a lot. I think one of the reasons you and I resonate so well with each other, we're able to kind of get on and just almost seemingly wing a show. But it's because I think you and I both have similar processes in going through this. And I find that as the more time you spend diving into this fifth generation warfare, I think by design, you are forced to kind of remove yourself further from it, right? You literally are forced to get further out to that 20, 30, 40. I mean, we might be at a 117,000 foot view at this point, right? And why is that? Because it may sound cliche to people. I know you've said it. I've said it. Many of us say it, that these podcasts and the work that we do is as much for the audience as it is for our own sanity, right? I think I was talking about this the other day. If you go back and look, I'm too embarrassed to do it, but if I were to go back and look at one of my podcasts from like 3 years ago versus now, it's completely different. And I think if you go back 3 years, there was a lot more minutia, a lot more detail on like things like decodes and things like that. Not that that doesn't have a place; it certainly does. But for our own mental sanity, the process I think that you do on your show, I do on my show, is as much of our thought process as it is as bringing content to people. Meaning, when I walk through a narrative, and the same way I do it on the show is exactly what I do in my own head to kind of try to process where we are. Now, you said the dreaded words when we started the show, right? Which I've said too, which is we talk about things like narratives converging and inflection points and things like that. And invariably, there's going to be people in the audience that are going to roll their eyes and say, you guys say that every time. Well, let's look at where we sit here in the second week of March, right? There's absolutely no question, at least in my mind, that we've hit an entirely different speed in the first 3 months of this year. In particular, just with the Epstein topic alone. And I know many people, because we've been staring at this stuff in some cases for 10 years, are jaded by that. But you have to focus on how it's affecting the rest of the world, right? You've taken something that literally, when we were doing shows together over Christmas, was conspiracy theory to the majority of the world, and it is arguably the number one topic being discussed across the world right now. And it continues to be fueled by ongoing narrative deployments, right? By design. Put out a thing about Prince Andrew, Peter Mendelsohn, seed Trump in there. All of a sudden, we found 47,000 more files. They just brought up the jail guard the other day that magically, after 7 years, we're diving back into that and figuring out that she took money, right? So you see this constant design of put things out, let it marinate, put things out. But I think it's important, as we always talk about, to not be sitting here and focusing on when is this going to be over, but to make sure you're looking back and acknowledging where we are. You have that. You have Venezuela. We had Trump go in and pluck out Maduro. We dug into that and figured out that sealed indictment didn't happen this year. It happened on March 26th of 2020, 6 years ago. And all of us that have been watching that know the narrative said, oh, watch this. This has nothing to do with regime change in Venezuela. This has nothing to do with oil. This has everything to do with 2020. Oh, wouldn't you know it? 2 months later, here's John Solomon and General Flynn and all them out there talking about 2020 and how Maduro is singing. Like, my God, how could we have guessed that, right? So, and then you get into things like Iran and the optics of that. And I'm sure you and Mike King, like everyone else, have dove into that. We see all the fakery and things going on there, and the level of control. You have Trump out there saying that the war will end anytime I want it to end. He's out there declaring we've won. The predictable sleeper cells being activated everywhere, which certainly fits into the narrative of open borders and having that blow back on Biden. So, no matter where you look, you can see the speed of everything picking up. And I just think it's always important to stop and acknowledge that. If you're going to maintain, you got two choices if you're going to dive into this world. You can do your best to try to make sense of it and zoom out and see how, no matter what it is that's put out in your news, if you really slow down and break it down calmly, you'll find that everything that's being put out in the news has some kind of purpose of fifth generation warfare that is completely different than what's being told to you on the television. Start with that, point to any narrative that's out there. And if you really dissect it, you're going to find that's the situation. So, you can either do that and try to maintain your sanity, or it's best for you to just step out and do something else, because good, bad, or indifferent, we're years and years and years beyond the concept of where you and I have even spoken. Even I know when you started your podcast, when I started my podcast, you and I were both in the processes of not only analyzing this stuff, but perhaps trying to make sure that we're convinced of ourselves that this is really what's happening. Well, here we sit in 2026. We have long shot beyond any notion of, is this what's happening? Is there an operation? Is there a fifth generation warfare goal? We have overshot that years and years and years ago. And so now all we can do is acknowledge that that's where we are. We don't control it, but we can get up every day and look at what's happening on your television and say, wait a second. It doesn't matter what the emotions are. Doesn't matter how bad it looks. Doesn't matter how many people around me are screaming the opposite. There's something at the heart of this, usually multiple reasons why this is happening right now. And if you can point to that, you can maintain your sanity through all this and acknowledge the progress we're making.
Yep. Well, it's so funny that you framed it that way, because I'm about a week out from my 5th year anniversary from when I first started. And by nature, I'm a very reflective person. I'm kind of nostalgic. And I look back very often at how far we've come as a whole, as a collective, but also from my own personal journey. Going back, I kind of chuckled when you said, listening to old podcasts and sort of cringing. I mean, every now and then I'll go back and I'll listen to some of my. First of all, I have to say I got to give credit to my audience, because they stuck with me when I was putting out podcasts. That, I mean, literally the audio was so bad that I sounded like I was at the bottom of the ocean. But when I was doing my coffee chats, and but I go back to those moments, those early moments, and you're absolutely right. It was a big part of that was me trying to convince myself and talking, basically just verbalizing and articulating what was going through my own head, having no idea that it was going to resonate with so many people. But you're right. At that point in time, it was really kind of an exploration for me of, like, to what extent do I really believe in this operation? How much control do the White Hats really have? I mean, for the first couple of years of my journey, I mean, that was kind of a central focal point. And as you also know, I went down a whole bunch of different rabbit holes with a bunch of guests that, quite frankly, I've sort of moved on from at this point. We all have our own journeys, and I certainly respect the role that they played, but it really is essential. What you pointed out is that throughout the process, we've learned to disconnect the focus from being on ourselves and our own journey and our own thoughts, which is always, of course, a part of it, and really trying to focus on how everything that we're seeing is actually affecting the masses, as Derek Johnson puts it, the target audience. And when that penny dropped, and I finally realized that everything that I'm watching and everything that I'm trying to make sense of really isn't directed at me, because I'm already awake and I'm kind of in a different zone than everybody else, a different lane than everybody else. And gradually, it's been a process of learning how to protect my mind, control my emotions, and to not allow myself to dive headlong into the movie. And still, when new events happen, I still have to fight back against that. There's still a part of me that's like, something happens. You take the Iran war, for example. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that was going to pop off. And immediately you kind of, like Mike King was talking about the other night, you tend to go back into the optics of the movie to try to make sense of it, instead of remaining at that 117,000 foot view. So it is a process, and indeed, it's been quite a journey, quite a ride. So on that note, why don't we talk a little bit about what's going on with Iran? I mean, there's so many different aspects of this conversation that we could really get into. To what extent do we think that this is I actually communicated with you a little bit behind the scenes, in terms of, how much of this is really wag the dog, how much of this is actually real kinetic situation. I think both of us were pretty much in agreement that it's the best way to characterize it as sort of a hybrid sort of situation, where there are undoubtedly deep state elements in Iran that they were referenced in the Q drops even more so than Epstein, talking about uranium one, they're talking about the black sites, talking about the 1.7 billion in pallets of cash that were sent over there. So undoubtedly there is an element of cleanup that's going on. But as always, even when we can't necessarily make sense of the full meaning of the narrative, the scene in the movie, we can see that the White Hats are in full control of how the information is being dispensed to everybody, to the public, in the process. And of course, we've got superimposed on the general warfare situation. There's the bombing of the school that Tucker Carlson he's been all over that. I know you have a Tucker clip up there, and indeed, he's also been talking about how if the stated goal is regime change, we can't really do that with an air campaign. It would really require ground troops, and he's even taken it a step further, essentially predicting, I guess you could say, or at least noting the possibility that we could be looking at some sort of a 9/11 type scenario that would justify escalating the war in terms of putting in ground troops in order to achieve whatever whatever the stated goal is in terms of the optics of the movie of regime change. So we've got that, and then I guess right alongside that, we also have the sleeper cells. That the whole conversation at first came out that I think it was ABC put out this story that there was chatter about attacks in California, and then they later retracted that. There's been talks about a military draft, so there's a lot of stuff going on that's playing a role in this. So, what's your general take on Iran in terms of some of the bullet points that I just listed there, and we can kind of talk about the situation and how it's playing out and where it might be headed. Curious.
Yeah, it's a good summary, and I think when it initially popped off, right? Like, okay, did we expect it at that moment? No. But then, just like everything else, like you let the thing play out, let the narrative seed in for a minute, and then step back and say to yourself, like, where does this fit into the puzzle? Like, is this something that Q talked about? When you go back to the drops, and you have 82 different drops, going back to the very beginning of in 2017, in particular, a lot through 2018 and 2019, that painted a picture, right? And without going into them in detail, what did they tell you? They gave you the model for. We were discussing this on Joe's Roundtable today. Q walked you through a very clear model of North Korea, beginning in 2017, before even the Q drops, when Trump was chirping about Little Rocket Man, and even like Stormy Patriot Joe was saying today, we call him the Q whisperer, right? He's predicted events, but even he was saying in September of 2017, before the drops came, he, like everyone else, we're sitting there going, the hell is this guy doing? He's going to start World War III, right? We're gonna have nuclear attack,
sending an armada over there, and that whole
right.
situation.
And then, for people that aren't familiar, you have to go back and look at some of the proofs of this, but just to talk to it on a very high level, then Q, over the next basically 9 months or a year, proceeded to walk you through numerous proofs that demonstrated that Trump was back channeling with Kim months and months and months in advance, right? They showed image proofs, they showed all sorts of stuff. And Q essentially came out and told you that this was all happening in the background. And by the time you got to the point, and what Q demonstrated is, by the time you got to that incredible moment, which is completely undersold by the mainstream media at the time, of Donald Trump stepping across the demilitarized zone to shake hands. And we were sitting there watching it, or at least I was, because I wasn't following the drops yet, thinking like, wow, this is a dangerous thing. The Secret Service couldn't stop it. No. What they showed you is that that was all pre-planned, because by the time he was meeting with Kim on our television, it was already taken care of. And Q was telling you about North Korea and about their plans and about the fact that it was a CIA dark site, right? And this rogue state that was designed to create a you attack one, you attack all type of situation, bring China, everybody into it. That was their playbook. And so this had to be neutralized. Well, and then what was the next country? It literally said Iran next, because that was another one of the big banker CIA playgrounds. And they said Iran was next. And it started talking about, knowing that the people have the power in Iran, and the good military generals who are like us in Iran will eventually rise up, and the people have the power. Then Q went on to say today, this is 2018, I believe, might have been 2019, doesn't matter. Literally said POTUS took control of Iran today. And so you have to have all that context, and then say to yourself, one of the reasons we look back so much, all of our different shows, we're always pulling stuff from years ago, is because you simply can't analyze what you're watching on your television today and just ignore everything that's gone on over the last 8-9 years. You can't do it. You have to look at what you were shown, all the predictions that Q made, and then you have to say, well, what else do we see? We saw military planes operating all over the world in 2020 and 2021 and 2 and 3, and multiple countries flying in and out of Iran and Iraq and every country in the world. There was a clear military operation going on that anybody with a computer could have looked at, right? As we were all, the masses were all getting caught up in Biden falling up the stairs and transgender and all the other stuff that were put out there for narrative purposes.
Those are the days of mass distraction, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And the last piece of it, and I do this with every single thing, is then you say to yourself, okay, let me look at what's being played out on the television. And then let me try to compare this to past events that I've lived through, and what's missing from it. And you find numerous things missing, right? Venezuela, I've been chirping on that. You take Venezuela and Iran, and yes, Iran's been optically a little bit more kinetic, but we all lived through Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq in particular, that was a war. That was boots on the ground. There was multiple insurgencies. There was, thousands of American troops killed seemingly every day. There was destabilization. We're now in our second public regime change, and there's none of the sort, right? The people in the streets, the day it happened, we didn't get insurgency. We didn't get factions within the country fighting for power like you would have in any other regime change throughout history. No, what did you have? You have people dancing in the streets, women taking their cover off, people dancing around the world, right? So then you have to say, well, wait a second. If I really put aside the optics and the AI images and all the other stuff that's being jammed down our throats, like, how could you go in Venezuela and rip a leader out, and a month later you have record oil flow, and you don't have any destabilization, you don't have any insurgency? How could you do the same thing in Iran and have it be so clean and swift? And the logic's going to tell you the only way that's possible is if, when Q was talking about this in 2018, that's when they were working on it, and they spent years and years and years infiltrating, having people within. Q told you there are good generals here that will rise up. Well, how did they know that? You would have had to have people in government, in military, in finance, in commerce, in every aspect of the country to ensure that when you go in there, or at least show the public that you're going in there and starting to make these kinetic actions, that it's not going to cause a destabilization. You have Donald Trump going out there the day of. I remember I watched that video, the one he posted at 3 a.m. The first thing that jumped out at me is, here's a president that we're being told is in the process of attacking another nation, that's in the process of ripping the head off the snake of that country, which, like I said, in any other world would cause destabilization. And what is he doing? He's telling the citizens to rise up and take over their government. Mm-hmm. Now, why has that never happened before in history? Because anybody with a brain knows if that was happening in real time, you would not say that, because that could cause an insurgency. That's why you didn't see people say that in Iraq and Afghanistan and anywhere else.
You probably wouldn't even have to say it, because like you indicated, all these different factions would be vying for power anyway. And the last thing that the president would want to do would be to add fuel to that fire. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And then, so, it's a process, and you can apply what I'm kind of saying to anything that goes on the television, big, small, little, that's the nature of what we're being bombarded with right now. You have to just be able to kind of really take a step back and say, well, what's missing from this? And then, like everything else, you can kind of dive into, you watch the narrative space, and you see what folks like General Flynn and Dan Scavino and Trump and others and people inside the Trump world, like, what are the things that they're putting out there that lead to something much larger? And I'm sure we've been both looking at a lot of these clips from the great people over at Promethean Action, to name one, that have been highlighting the important. And you look at, one other piece. Then you look for unprecedented actions, i.e., Trump taking back the Strait of Hormuz from Lloyd's of London, who had controlled it via maritime insurance for 339 years. Mm-hmm. And then you start to go down that rabbit hole, and you start to realize, like, there's something much, much larger at play here. And we can get into that if you want. So it's just it's a process of really just dissecting everything you've seen, everything you've been presented with, following the patterns, and then saying, okay, now there's a whole lot of things that are happening now that are not like they were before. And you can give multiple examples. You and I have spoken quite a bit, not to sidebar, about all the money that's been brought in over the first year, all the money that's been in the massive investment, $500 billion from Apple and everything else. And you read that narrative and you say, okay, that's great. You go to move on and you say, well, wait a second. What's different here than in the past? What's different is, in any other time in history, it takes companies years upon years to redeploy capital like that. So then you say, well, if this is happening differently than it ever has before in history, what are the reasons why? And then you come back to things like executive orders and asset seizure and everything else. Well, the same thing with this. This is not playing out like anything we've ever seen before. China, which gets 60% of their oil from Iran, is sitting there watching these people get attacked, and they're sitting there on the sideline, barely saying a word. That never happened like that before. Our greatest ally.
Not only that, China actually criticized Iran for striking its neighbors.
Right.
Their foreign ministry. I mean, that would be like the least of their concerns if this was actually playing out organically.
Yeah. And then the last piece I would just say that goes right into the situation with City of London, Lloyd's of London, the Strait of Hormuz, is you have our greatest ally, Great Britain, sitting on the sidelines denouncing it. Well, why? Because we are literally, with what Trump did in the Strait of Hormuz, attacking the very power structure, i.e. the City of London, that has control of this stuff, that created the entire situation in the Middle East with Israel and Iran, everything that's being cleaned up today. So it's it's like everything else. There's just it may sound cliche to people because we always say there's so much more going on than what's happening on your television, but just a little bit of analysis, and you can certainly prove that that's the case.
Absolutely. And just like with every other situation, we can apply logic to it, and we would, kind of compare it to how would this really be playing out if this was actually happening the way that they're portraying it on TV. And we know that there's just a massive disconnect there. One of the things you mentioned, though, that was kind of interesting is that, and I agree with you, is that the optics surrounding the situation in Iran are a lot more kinetic than say Venezuela. Venezuela is like we hit him with the discombobulator, and we took Maduro, and basically that was it. Case closed. So I guess there's sort of a two-pronged question. A lot of the analysis that you laid out there, I completely agree with. One of the things I wonder about, though, is did they go in 2018, 2019 and basically like set up all the bowling pins, make sure they had all their ducks in a row and just wait for the right moment to pull the trigger and to go kinetic and to clean up all these different elements that they needed to? Or are we watching a replay of that kinetic action that already took place, or somewhere in between? I'm kind of curious to get your take on that. And is the kinetic nature because of the optics and how it affects the country that's being saved for last? Because unlike with Venezuela and unlike with North Korea, when we're talking about Iran, we're basically coupling that with Israel and the whole concept of the Greater Israel Project. And Netanyahu coming out and basically saying this is making us a regional power, not just a regional power, but a superpower. We've got Mike Huckabee sitting down with Tucker Carlson. No mistake, I don't think that he said that. Oh yeah, it'd be fine. They have a biblical right to just take the entire Middle East. So they're deploying all these narratives alongside it. And so I'm wondering, do you think that that's part of the reason that we're seeing the optics of a much more kinetic situation, and also they're dangling all these other threats on top of it that they really haven't done? I mean, who knows? North Korea is also a factor that may come into play down the road. They actually, Kim Jong-un just came out today and said that Japan is threatening the region by moving some missiles around. So we might have some action as far as North Korea goes. But Iran is being in the Middle East and being the arch nemesis of Israel makes it a unique case. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I gotta preface this by saying I think we always got to keep in mind that when Q tells you future proves past, that's not just a cliche. It applies to so many things. So like what we're speculating on right now, like I don't think we have the complete picture yet. I think in a couple of months, we'll probably be able to answer that question even better. But
yeah,
just on the surface, right? The drops tell you 80% covert, 20% for public justice, right? Mm-hmm. So I actually think that even kind of applies here. If I had to guess, I would argue that 80% of what you're seeing on the television is for narrative purposes, and 20% actually has a purpose. And going back to my theory on holes, like where can you find some holes in the story? I mean, even Bill Maher did a joke about it in his monologue. He said the Ayatollah has to be the dumbest regime I've ever seen in my life. I'm paraphrasing. He's like, because he sat there for 2 months and watched his country get surrounded by Navy ships, and he didn't leave his compound. He not only did he not leave his compound, he brought in 59 of his people. Like, where is the first place we're going to strike? Okay, so right off the bat, you just have to start with something like that. I mean, I was screaming that from the top of my lungs the day it happened. I'm like, there's how many months did it take to find Saddam Hussein and track down his brothers and everything? Because he gets surrounded by a nation that's about to invade. You run. That's been the case throughout history. Leaders go into exile. No, not these guys. They just stayed there. They stayed there.
They all gathered together in one room to have breakfast.
Right. So what do I think happened there? Not to get caught in the weeds on individual narratives. I think that's a situation where they probably went in and neutralized them at some point, probably using special forces or something, like I believe we did with Maduro. And then what you're seeing on the television is simply that it's bombing an empty building or something like that. Some of the other things may be as simple as you cleaned up, you have it, you have the government under control, you have the military under control. You would obviously need to have people infiltrate all the different, the same way we have militias and patriot groups here, they have that over there. So you'd have to account for that, right? You'd have to make sure that at least the major thing, you have to make sure there's not a version of the Q operation in Iran that if we pull the leader out, they're going to go in the wrong direction, right? You'd have to account for all of that.
All those
And
contingencies.
yeah, I'm sure some of the things you're seeing, okay, you know what, bomb that warehouse. That warehouse, they were running drugs. They were, they had the listing to whatever it may be. I'm sure some of that is actually happening. But, you go back to what like Mike King and I were discussing last night. I know you've seen it. There are clearly, in many cases, crisis actors being used, recycled footage, AI. And so you have to just stop and say, why would they be using, if this was a fully kinetic war with people getting injured, why do they have to use crisis actors? Why do they have to use doctored footage? Why is Fox and ABC and everybody using the classic indication of a PSYOP, which is to take 3 images or 3 clips of bombings and recycle them for 20 minutes while the same guy's talking on the air, right? That's programmed. Why would that happen? Why were we told there's 32,000 civilians that were killed in like 2 weeks, yet we have absolutely no images of it or video or anything, right? Why?
When everybody's got a cell phone and
right.
Yep.
Right. So there is your evidence that something isn't what it is. Now, as far as why, that's the other question. Well, why? It doesn't make sense. Well, think about just a couple of things you pointed out. Like you pointed out Tucker Carlson, right? I think the other trap that many of us fall into is trying to look at, to dissect the narrative based on our lens and not realizing that we have one lens. The 4 to 6% have a completely opposite lens. There's multiple groups in the middle that have different lenses, and you have to address each of those, right? So just give you one quick example. You mentioned Tucker, right? Tucker and Candace Owens in particular have gone optically off the rails, and they're sitting there saying that Trump is being controlled by Israel. Now, do I believe Tucker Carlson thinks that for a minute? Absolutely not. I mean, he's literally was flying around with Donald Trump during the pause. I don't believe that for a minute. So why? Well, the bombings, the television bombings, allow him to go out and do that. And why is that not a bad thing? Because there's an entire group of people, millions of people, that don't understand the connection between Israel and the city of London, that don't understand the greater Israel project that was designed to destabilize the whole region, right? That don't understand that every war we've been in, especially over the last 50 years, has been at the behest of the Israeli deep state. And so you would take advantage of this narrative and let Tucker and Candace go out there, and you're getting people every day that are going to turn this on and go, wait a second, what do they mean controlled by Israel? Wait, let me listen. Because now it's not something that happened 10, 20 years ago. It's in your face right now. Your gas prices are being affected by it. Your news is being affected by it. You're worried about the stock market. It's emotionally impactful to you. And that's the perfect time to deploy truth to people. Let them see that. So the black pilling there, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's by design, right? And I'll give you one last piece of it before I go back to you. We were, when I say we, I don't just mean me. I mean us as a collective group. Many of the anons that are good at dissecting narrative warfare. The day this happened, we were like, well, just watch. You've been getting hits on the drops of false flags. We just went in and optically attacked Iran. We've been told there are millions of illegals that have come in. Donald Trump said in 2024, 100% there will be a terrorist attack. Kristi Noem came out 6 months ago and said there's 18,000 people on the terror watch list. Now, we know that's not true. We know what happened during the Biden administration. So if it didn't, then it's narrative. Why is it being put there? Well, because the second we attack them, you're going to start hearing chirping about Iranian terror cells being activated in false flags, the same sleeper cells that Q was talking about in 2018. Mm-hmm. And then you just apply some simple common sense to say, do you think Donald Trump would go and attack Iran if we know about the sleeper cells, don't you think he in the military does?
Yeah.
If Patriot Underground, if our order of operations be first neutralize the sleeper cells, then attack Iran so we don't put our people at risk, do you think he doesn't know? So then you say, why? Well, the why on the false flags, I believe, multitude of purposes. Number one, I think you're flooding the zone on shootings. So I think you're taking away a weapon of the deep state, right? You know, Sandy Hook in particular was spoken about by Q as the why, and it would say why school shootings, why children, and they taught you that they weaponize school shootings to get our emotions and hijack our narrative. Well, if you're going to hijack a narrative, you don't do 30 school shootings because we can't pay attention to them all. You do one, like Columbine, like Sandy Hook, and you drill that over. And the next day you pull somebody else from the school and this parent and that parent. You keep it. That's not what they're doing. They're throwing 2, 3 a day at you right now. And that doesn't give the people the opportunity to get emotionally tied to any of them. So you're taking away that weapon, right? It may seem bad. We're desensitizing people to shootings. Sure. But there's a design. They're taking away that weapon. And then obviously you listen to the predictable narrative, which is they spent 4 years setting you up saying Biden opened the border, terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. These are the downstream effects. And now as these things are happening, you can simply go, see what they did, see what they did, see what they did. And at the same time, you got the same people that optically opened the border voting against funding the Department of Homeland Security, the one group that is designed to protect us from it. And so as it keeps happening, you can keep pointing the blame at them. So any road you go down, if you slow down, you can find just some common sense reasons why it's being done this way and why we didn't just go and say, hey, we got them out, everything's fine, sing kumbaya. Then all the stuff I described, you couldn't do.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I was laughing because I actually put out a post a little bit earlier. There was a story about, Trump came, he was asked about the sleeper cells and he said, we pretty much know where all of them are, I think. Just to kind of toy with everyone a little bit. But you just apply a little bit of logic and you say to yourself, well, if the president of the United States knows where they are and we're ostensibly at war with Iran, why do these terrorist cells even exist? Unless they don't, right? And then meanwhile, we've got, like you mentioned, Tucker, and maybe we can play that clip of him talking a little bit, seeding this narrative about another 9/11. I think it's very interesting that that story is, they're talking about California. They're talking about lucky Larry Silverstein just so happens to own a massive building in California. So I saw that today. I was like, repeats necessary. We'll have to see what happens. But yes, we were told by Trump in no uncertain terms that at a certain point, there was going to be a 100% chance of a terrorist attack. 100% chance. That takes the chance out of it. It's a certainty. It's just a question of how it's going to play out, what the optics are going to be surrounding it. So on that note, why don't we watch this clip here and we'll break it down a little bit.
To win, well, the most obvious and often repeated observation about this conflict is totally true. Iran's threshold for victory is very low. It just needs to survive. The regime has to remain intact. Now, in order to change the regime, everyone pretty much agrees you would need ground forces. You'd need troops, boots on the ground, American boots on the ground, in order to do that. And there is zero appetite for that in this administration, much less in the country. Israel would like us to commit ground troops, obviously, but it would take a lot to get us to do that. It would take some sort of terror attack in the United States, probably like 9/11, in order for us to do that. But that hasn't happened yet. We pray it never happens. So at this point, we're not going to commit ground troops, which does sort of put the whole exercise in perspective. If Iran's burgeoning nuclear program was really a threat to our core national security interests, then of course we would commit ground troops, because any threat to our core national security interests merits committing ground troops. But this one didn't. And the people who decided this were told, or believed somehow, that we could effect regime change from the air, because Iran was in a pre-revolutionary stage and all we needed to do was like topple the head figure, like dominoes cascading. That would set off a chain reaction that installed a pro-Western government in Tehran. That was the argument. These arguments always seem ludicrous. In retrospect, you always laugh at them. Really? Did you really think that? Well, apparently we really did. But almost 2 weeks in, that has not happened. By the way, that would be a great outcome because it would end the war.
Yeah. So there you go. He's I guess in a sense he's mirroring a lot of the stuff that we've already broken down there. But anything specific about that clip you wanted to mention?
Well, it feeds right into the education, right? That there's you have him with millions of people, Candace Owens with millions of people, others that are feeding that notion that Donald Trump is being controlled. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump just last week posted a clip about Israel getting us in every major war over the last 30 years. The end of the clip talked about Bibi being something like completely insane or an evil person. He posted that. So nobody in our world should worry that that's the case. But there's a perfect example.
And that, by the way, is not the first time he's done that. I remember he posted a whole bunch of Jeffrey Sachs clips as well, who was basically saying the same thing about Netanyahu, etc. So this is it wasn't a one-off by Trump either. And that's part of the context, like you say, that we have to keep in mind as all this stuff is playing out. We can't forget the things that we saw leading up to this event. Keep that in the back of our mind. So continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, as far as like what else could be happening, again, I don't want to make the people going around saying, this is what is going to happen, but where I think this ultimately will lead. I think you have multiple things right now. I believe that one of the reasons we're seeing so many of the false flags become more obvious is I think they're slowly bringing along a whole new group of millions of people, led by the likes of a Candace Owens, led by the likes of somebody that wields 10 million viewers each time, that is taking things like the Charlie Kirk psyop and exposing it, not the way we describe it, but everything else, right? Exposing the fakery, exposing the narratives that don't make sense, exposing the scientific evidence that doesn't make sense, and seeding in what kind of connections. Oh, shocker, connections to Israel, right? So she's building a coalition of people that are learning for the first time or maybe the second time that, oh yeah, it's possible that the deep state of Israel has enough type of control where they could assassinate somebody using a false flag operation, exactly like they did with JFK 60 years ago, exactly like they did with the USS Liberty, and on and on and on, right? And at the same time, some of these shootings, right? The Austin, Texas shooting, I've been screaming about that one for 2 weeks, with the crisis actors, right? Something has clearly happened where almost every time as the weeks and months go on, it's not just that we're getting better at it. There's a whole new audience of people. There are millions of people now. And yes, it might not have made it into your household yet, but the numbers don't lie. There are millions of people on social media that when something like the Austin, Texas shooting happened is looking at that video going, wait a second, that blood stain doesn't make sense. The CPR compressions are consistent with a dummy, not with a human body. The blood spatter, all that other stuff. And I think that's a design because you can't go from 1% of the population knowing about this stuff to, hey, Sandy Hook wasn't real and 9/11 didn't happen that way. You have to kind of move people towards the middle.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this is part of seeding for something that maybe it'll be this time around, maybe it'll be 6 months or a year from now. I don't know. But I think they're planting seeds. If you could put that where it says slides right there, just want to go back to the State of the Union. Keep in mind, Donald Trump started his speech during the State of the Union at exactly 9:11 p.m.
That's right.
And then Dan Scavino, about 30 minutes later, came out at 9:48 p.m. and posted a picture of the Team USA, of which they brought not all 23 players, but only 17 players out. So they were giving you a calm, pay attention to this. And that 9:48 bangs off a Q drop 21:48 that talks about, shocker, 9/11, we'll never forget, we'll never forget. This was all before Iran popped off.
Yep.
Right. So you have that. And now what else is happening? Right. Pick it out of the narrative. You have rumblings of Israel controlling the American president. Right. And now you have Tucker talking about a 9/11 style attack. Well, we all know the 9/11 style attack was done by our government, the Israeli deep state, the intelligence agencies to justify getting us into a Middle East war. Repeats necessary. There's your parallel. So I think what he's seeding is the convergence of things that we're using. Like I said before, it's important to use current events. Telling somebody who the boogeyman was 20 years ago doesn't do anything. There was no great mass awakening because we told everybody that the CIA killed Kennedy. That didn't do it. It has to be something that's affecting your life and your fears and your emotions right now.
And there's a whole generation of people, especially younger people, who really don't have any point of reference for 9/11.
Exactly. Exactly. So, to your point earlier, you were saying like we don't quite know how that's going to go yet. On one hand, I think it's a good. I'm glad you started with that clip because I think it calls out kind of a dichotomy that I see right now in narratives where you have Trump coming out saying, as I said before, we've won the war. There's nothing left. They don't have any assets left. It will end anytime I want it to. He's putting that out, and on the other hand, you have Tucker saying, "Well, Israel's about to, sponsor another 9/11 style attack, so we can get to another forever war." And you have all these false flags popping off all over the country. So, on one hand, I could see it ending and us getting kind of the clean and swift thing. On the other hand, I could see a 9/11, some kind of big event popping off. I believe it would be our event, and it would lead to all roads pointing towards Israel. I don't know. If that doesn't happen, I'm not going to be disappointed because I still look at things like Erica Kirk, right? Erica Kirk, they're dragging that along because I believe at some point she'll be arrested, exposed as having killed her husband, even though he's not dead. That's the story. And imagine the impact that'll have. You could go either way. Imagine a 9/11 attack and it blows back on Israel, and or Erica Kirk being found out to have been an agent for Israel that had her husband killed because he was about to, stop taking Israeli money and all those other things. Any one of those or any combination thereof. Now you have current events that people are emotionally tied to that could boomerang back on the deep state. Then you boomerang that back on the deep state of Israel. Now you can go back and talk about 9/11. Now you can go back and talk about the USS Liberty. Now you can go back and talk about JFK, and it'll actually have an impact because the public will have lived through something that's near and dear to their hearts.
Not only that, it would also give Trump the optics to pivot away from supporting Netanyahu and supporting the Zionists. And I mean, that's been one of the big questions, because it seems like with every passing day, he kind of digs this hole deeper and deeper and deeper in terms of getting, being joined at the hip with Netanyahu and the Zionists and all of this, the optics about anti-Semitism and all of the focal point has really just been kind of nonstop and moving in that direction. So it begs the question, how does it, how do they transition out of that? A Charlie Kirk type of a situation would be very interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up, because speaking of Tucker Carlson, he was on with Brett Weinstein. I don't know if you saw that interview as well, where they were talking about Charlie, and they were talking about in the context of the Iran war. And he had a very interesting theory about why Charlie was actually removed. So let's go ahead and watch that clip, because I found this to be very interesting, and it dovetails perfectly with where we're at in the conversation right now.
I feel, and I cannot say for sure, but I feel that something was watching, and it felt the clock ticking, and its opportunity to finally bring about this war, which I think Netanyahu said he's been dreaming of for 40 years.
He did say that.
So something wanted this war to happen, and there was the perception that the opportunity, the window was closing, so it had to be brought about quickly. Given how public Charlie was on this topic, I can't help but wonder. Now, obviously, that will sound crazy to many people, that something would have even considered such a thing. But I will say that after Charlie was killed, Benjamin Netanyahu very quickly denied responsibility for it. I was shocked by this. It did not seem natural. Now, I'm not saying that that means that anything in that quadrant was responsible for the murder. All I know is that we didn't get a decent investigation. But I did feel, and maybe I hope you will tell me that I'm imagining this. I did feel that denial by Netanyahu was effectively a Rorschach test, and maybe designed to be one. That I was supposed to feel alarmed by this, and a normal person was supposed to think, that is batshit crazy. He said they didn't do it. Obviously, they didn't do it. So anyway, I'm not telling you that I see the evidence that somebody did it, but what I am telling you is we've just found ourselves in a war that Charlie would have been opposed to. We know that from his public and private statements, and that he would have been a formidable force in opposition. So what am I to think? Why, at least we should have an investigation that tells us for sure that we know who committed the crime and that there wasn't something larger about it. But look, now I've said unforgivable things. It's done.
I don't know why that's unforgivable. I mean, this is an American citizen, someone you knew, and you're not accusing anyone of anything. And I do think, leaving aside Charlie's murder and, the question of who did it, for a foreign leader to weigh in immediately and hog all the attention and make it all about himself and start issuing all these statements about how Charlie lived and died for Israel is totally unforgivable. And I say this as his friend. I just think if someone did that to me after my death, I think my family would be outraged. It's not about you,
right,
BB? So that was disgusting behavior from someone with a track record of disgusting behavior. But at the very least, we could say that's just wrong. That's not how you behave in the wake of a young man's murder. And I'm never alleged. I don't even talk about this topic, and I'm not going to now, other than to say, I think everything you've said is entirely reasonable, and it's not an insult to the living.
Well,
to want to know what happened to the dead.
So I found that to be absolutely fascinating, because it was a very good reminder that, yes, indeed, who was the first guy after Charlie Kirk died and was murdered, the first guy to offer his condolences. And before he was even accused by anybody, he was basically coming out and saying Israel had nothing to do with this, and we love Charlie. And he also lays out what should be pretty obvious to everybody, which is that leading up to Charlie's death, we've all seen the clips about 1 million times. And I mean, his death, everybody knows we're watching a movie. I'm talking about the optics here, but just so there's no confusion, he was pivoting hard away from Israel. First of all, as far as Iran goes, he made the case on numerous occasions of how it would be absolute insanity to go to war with Iran. He linked it up to Israel. He went so far as to basically admit that he had had an epiphany, an awakening, as it pertains to all of the quote unquote stereotypes pertaining to Israel and the elite Jews and all the different things that they're funding, and how that they were pushing for this war with Iran. And so we often talk about the genius of the scriptwriters, how they're weaving all these different narratives together. Now, back when this Charlie Kirk event happened, how long ago was it? Was it like, I tend to lose track of time.
September 10th.
Okay, so we're talking like 6 months ago. At that point in time, nobody really could have foreseen that in March we were going to see the optics of this war in Iran. But this guy, and I'm not even sure who Brett Weinstein is, to be honest with you, but he's basically laying out the case there that, look, they were on a timeline. They knew that this war had to happen. And they also saw Charlie turning, not only opposing the war in Iran, but basically turning on Israel at the exact moment that they were about to make moves. Makes a lot of sense that they had to take him out of the picture. So if that turns out to be the way that they script it, and like you talked about, all of the emotionality, all I mean, we all remember how we all felt on that day. I mean, even myself, I kind of normed for a little while there. I was just kind of grieving it, before I started to get my senses back. But the entire country was swept up in this, and it caused this massive revival in terms of people coming back to God and so on and so forth. And it's very fresh in the memory. It would be absolutely brilliant to weave those two narratives together and to have it ultimately come out that Charlie was eliminated by Israel to pave the way, because they knew this Iran war was coming, and he was such a powerful voice that could have swayed public opinion against it. And Trump, of course, would have the optics of saying, well, I didn't know anything about this, completely blindsided by the whole thing. Erica Kirk gets wrapped up in the narrative as well as being implicated. And that just, I mean, you talk about a bombshell for all the normies, would completely change the optics, completely change the entire dynamic in terms of our relationship with Israel. It would give Trump an off-ramp. So, I mean, I'm speculating here, but when I saw that clip, I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. What are your thoughts?
It's amazing how that all came together at this time, right? It's almost like somebody had scripted it that way or planned it that way. I think you're over the target, and I hate to always keep going backwards, but you have to. Look, I'll be the first one to say we've all gotten a lot of stuff wrong. Nothing more than timing, right? That's why we don't make timing guesses anymore. However,
that's why I don't listen to my old podcast, because it's
yeah.
listen to all that stuff. But anyway,
yeah. But yet there are certain things that the Anons have gotten very right. And in the case of Charlie Kirk, in my humble opinion, um, none less than the fact that he didn't die that day and that was our operation. And I'm diverting for a reason, because very often you've seen this, dude, Patriot. You've been around long enough to know that there have been like take Trump not getting shot, right? That we caught a lot of flack for that one, and there's not too many people questioning that anymore openly. In fact, if anything, I've seen a lot of people months later looking back, going, "Wait a second."
That's one of the few that I can actually like kind of give myself a minor pat in the back, because I came out like that very night and I was like, this is, and we hit the barbed wire first, then you take flack for that. But absolutely, we turned out to be right.
But one of the litmus tests is you can do, and the reason I say that is because I think one of the brilliant things about this operation is every once in a while when you get something like that right, as time goes on, you get more and more evidence, either directly or anecdotally, as to why you were right. Now, take this, for example. You always have to ask who benefits. So, and a lot of times you backtrack on that. And you say, well, it's not possible, right? So let's take for a minute the optics of any deep state. But let's just say the Israeli deep state, for argument's sake, since this is where the narrative is pointing right now. Now, the same Israeli deep state that took out Kennedy and kept it under wraps for 60 years from much of the population, kept the USS Liberty under wraps, kept 9/11 under wraps. Yet this time, as we sit here 6-7 months later, you have millions and millions of people still talking about it. Millions and millions of people making all the connections that you just did about Erica Kirk and Charlie's pivot and the money funding and the emails and all. 10 million people circulating Candace Owens videos. You had, even if you don't believe it had anything to do with Israel, you have an even bigger group of people looking at the video going, that doesn't add up, a 30-6. Now, who does that benefit? Does that benefit the deep state in one iota? No. Does that benefit Israel in any possible way? No. Does that benefit our government in any way, who tried to cover it up with the FBI and cash patel? No. There is literally not 1 ounce of this that benefits them. It has created a whole new group of conspiracy theorists, air quotes. It's created a whole new group of Israeli deep state conspiracy theorists. It's created a groundswell movement amongst kids 17 to 25, hundreds and hundreds of new Turning Point chapters. Their numbers. Is that what the deep state, which is so calculated in their operations, like I could have predicted this. You could have predicted that. You're telling me the same people that have kept us under wraps and in the dark for 150 years suddenly couldn't have calculated this? So when you look at this and you see every last thing benefits us, none of it benefits them, and you want to say that was their operation or that was our operation?
Yeah, they just got really sloppy, and we got so smart.
Right?
I don't think it works that way. We are getting smarter, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But with every PSYOP, obviously, it gets a little bit more obvious. But I also think they're making it intentionally sloppy. They're leaving all types of holes in the story. And as we also know, they're throwing a lot of shade on the DOJ in particular and the FBI in the process in terms of the investigation as it pertains to Charlie Kirk. Nothing to see here, open and shut. Tyler Robinson, so there's also that question. I often think about the off ramps in terms of how they're gonna play this all out. Assuming the Cash is a good guy, Pam Bondi is actually a good. She's on the team and so forth. So I tend to wonder about that. But in terms of the direction that they're taking it, and all the different questions that are just baked into the cake in terms of the narrative that they're putting out there that just doesn't make sense to anybody. It completely, it's that cui bono question that we always answer is kind of a litmus test of where we're at. And we also know that in the real world, just like we were talking about in a different context in Iran, they would shut down all of these different voices. They wouldn't allow Candace Owens to have tens of millions of views. They wouldn't allow Tucker Carlson, no matter what they had to do to silence them. You better believe that they would if they were actually in control. It doesn't matter who. they've killed presidents before. They've killed anyone that's gotten in their way that actually threatened their ability to carry out their operations. And so once again, we're seeing that them weave that narrative here with Charlie as a very interesting twist in the plot line, in my view.
Yeah, and to bring it to current event, well, it is a current event. To bring it to the top of mind event right now, it would be easy for somebody to say, okay, Dave, I'll use your logic and let me talk about the false flags. There's lots of people getting pissed off at Trump because we're having false flags because of his actions. And yeah, that might be true today. The same way a week after Trump imposed the tariffs and the stock market dropped 1,200 points, there was a lot of people that were against Trump and the tariffs. But just wait a week or wait a month. We're not done yet. Let me just give you a quick example. Those same people that are against Trump right now because there's false flags, what if there was a false flag and it was immediately blamed on somebody that Biden let in, that a DA didn't prosecute, and it was because the DHS wasn't funded? How quickly do you start to swing people? They won't even remember the cause and effect of Trump. They'll simply remember what they were told on the television, right? So it's like everything else. We were making the analogy the other day of, you got to keep in mind, the military doesn't get up every day the way we do and microanalyze every news story, right? They don't care where public opinion is right now. They don't care if over the last 2 weeks, 20 million people have turned against Trump because of Israel. They don't care because they know when they finish this aspect of the operation, that 20 million will come back and another 50 million from the other side or the middle will come back as well. They look at it in big chunks. They don't care about the black pillars that are on and off the roller coaster with every news story that happens on X. They don't care about that.
No,
Same thing with the tariffs. Like, they're like, well, they sat there and said, yep, we know the stock market's going to drop and we'll use our analytics, and MAGA just lost 20 million people. And then when the stock market boomerangs back and tariffs are proven to work and inflation starts coming down, we're going to get back those 20 plus another 10 million. Net, we gain 10 million people. They don't care if it goes up and down week to week. That's not the way they look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually another piece to this whole thing with and I kind of mentioned it in the opening tonight with the school, the bombing of the school. That's getting a lot of attention as well. And Tucker had and we were doing a lot of Tucker clips tonight, but it's just kind of flowing together in terms of the conversation here. So he had an interesting take on, once again, tying the events of this attack on the school, the optics of it, to Israel. Again, all roads leading to Israel. So if you don't mind, we'll just go ahead and watch this. About a couple minutes here, and then we can pivot away from Israel. I think from Iran and Israel at that point, and start getting into some other issues. But this is probably a good way to bring it all together.
Israeli priorities may have informed our tragic decision to bomb, and it was revealed today it was, in fact, tragically, the U.S. military, by mistake, bombing a girls' school attached to an Iranian naval base where the daughters of naval officers went to school, and over 100 of them were killed. Well, that's just terrible, okay? America doesn't do stuff like that, and actually doesn't. And the times that we have done it, we've apologized and prosecuted the people who did it. When civilians are killed in large numbers and it becomes public, the United States military, going back hundreds of years, has felt a moral obligation, being a Western, not an Eastern country, to apologize for the death of innocents and punish the people responsible. It's happened a lot. Because we don't do things like that. Israel does do things like that. Israel sets off pagers in the pockets of people they can't identify. They're just out there. They're going to go off and they'll kill some terrorists and maybe some others, which they did. And that's a price they're willing to pay. That's not a price that we're willing to pay because we're not Israel. So you have to wonder, how did this happen? So the U.S. government is saying this was a tragedy. It was a mistake. Totally believable. It was a case of bad targeting. Where'd the targeting come from? That's the question. Where do we get those targeting numbers? Oh, we don't know, of course, but it's worth asking. Where do we get those numbers? And by the way, where do we get the intel upon which we made our assumptions that we should go into Iran and that there was a huge and anxious group of liberal-minded Iranians who wanted to throw off the shackles of theocracy and that just a few choice bombs would unleash the desire for freedom within, and they would do the work for us and affect regime change themselves, and that from among them would arise a pro-Western leader. Why did we think that was true? Turned out not to be true, unfortunately. Well, it may not surprise you to learn that almost all of our signals information, our SIGINT, out of Iran, is translated by our ally and partner in this war, Israel.
Oh, shocker. Mike
Yeah.
King was right again.
Yep.
He actually, I think he said that, I don't know when that, I think those clips dropped today, I believe.
I believe so, yes.
We were talking about that last night. We were talking about the school shooting and the lack of video and the lack of evidence and the dots that don't add up. And he even said, he goes, what are the chances that's going to boomerang back on Israel?
Boom. Yep. It certainly seems that way, right?
I mean, I'll just say this. Look, I always have to say this because I'm not in favor of going out and blanketly stating everything's fake, although you can certainly poke holes in a lot of things that are being told to you on the television right now. So, of course, I reserve the right to the possibility that there actually was a school bombing. I don't think there was, and I have plenty of reasons about that we don't have to get into. But I go back to what Trump... Look, and maybe this is irresponsible of me, but I'll just say it anyway. I very often look at things this way. I try to be, and I've been this way a lot of my life, and certainly the last 6-7 years has drilled it further into me. In terms, it's taught me to be very measured in what I say and how I say it. Now, so I think to myself, well, if I wouldn't say something, Donald Trump, who's the most powerful person in the history of Earth, other than Jesus Christ, probably is a few steps ahead of me, right? So I don't think I would go out in the middle of rumors that we accidentally bombed the school and right away say, no, we didn't do it. I know that. That was what his initial response was. You don't say that. Why don't you say that? Because Donald Trump is constantly operating from a state of PR, a state of game theory, meaning you think ahead, you go, I can't say this now because I don't know it. And if it turns out to be the other way around, it's going to look really bad on me. That's why you don't get out over your skis, as they say it. If I know that, there's no way Donald Trump didn't know that. So it may sound like, oh, you're just taking everything Trump said. No, I'm thinking through what anybody with that level of intellect in that scenario would not say. You would not. That's why, look, that's another reason some of these psyops are so obvious, because if you go back and look at news 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and look at now, there's so many things being put out on the television. It's like everything gets wrapped up in 24 hours. There's a school shooting. 10 hours later, they got the guy's social media, his birth certificate. They're talking to his friends. They found his storage. That's not the way it works. Why? Because law enforcement leadership is usually calculated in not saying something that isn't true for the sake of getting it out there, because of the downstream effects it could have. So I don't think you can underestimate Trump coming out right after that happened and saying we didn't do it. And then you say to yourself, my initial thing was, well, then the story came out. Mike King was talking to him earlier today, saying the New York Times published a cover story saying an investigation has identified the United States as the target, as the responsible party for the bombing. Okay. And he said, well, wait, what, this is where you got to slow down and say, what are the possible directions this could go in? How could this affect the narrative to our advantage? It may seem bad right now, but what if Israel told us to bomb it? Well, that changes everything. And there it is from Tucker Carlson. Yep. So we're not done with that yet.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, initially they came out and they said, Trump and Hegseth said they think that it was Iran. So that was kind of their initial hedge, but it's going to be interesting to see how they play this whole thing out and whether or not it boomerangs back on Israel, whether or not they're actually going to openly address it. Because up until this point, Trump has been very sort of evasive about it, but he has come out and essentially said it. You're right. I mean, he's basically said we're not responsible for this. And he didn't use those exact words, but that's pretty much the impression that he's giving. And what do we tend to find with Trump? Usually when he says something, it turns out to be true. Maybe the optics are going to get really confusing and muddy for a while. It's going to look as if he was wrong about something, and then ultimately it boomerangs back. And that's really the big question is, how is all of this? I mean, because seemingly everything that we talk about, all roads lead back to Israel one way or another. And now that we've got this huge conflagration going on optically in the Middle East with Iran. Israel's more in the spotlight than ever. And this, by the way, it was just right on the heels. I mean, this is in a sense kind of why it took me a little bit by surprise, was because we were like neck deep in the Epstein files, you know? And so like, and then all of a sudden we just woke up one Saturday morning, and I mean, like, you're right, all of these things were happening, that Iran was being encircled. They were sending over an armada over there, and all that. I kind of envisioned it going in the direction of kind of like what you talked about with North Korea. That's what Mike King and I were discussing at the time. And then all of a sudden it popped off. So it was a little bit jarring at first, but you're right. I mean, it certainly, it definitely, it's amazing to me how all of these different events are all, it's talk about encirclement. It's like basically like in the narrative space, Israel's being encircled by every story that comes out.
Yeah. And then, Patriot, to your point, right? A lot of people struggle with the notion, I know you understand this, struggle with the notion that the fifth generation warfare strategy of why you would continually insert Donald Trump into the narrative with Epstein, even though we all know that if they had proof of that, they would have used it 10 years ago. Well, we know that certainly draws in the left, the people with TDS. But to your point, it was a little maybe unexpected at that point that we went into Iran. But then you say, okay, now, well, how can we tie this back to Epstein? Well, we just came up with three things here, right? You're talking about
Charlie Kirk, Epstein.
Right,
Yes.
right. What is the common thread? No, that crowd that is the black pill crowd that's screaming that Donald Trump is being controlled by Israel. Well, what do you think they're thinking is the mechanism by which they're controlling Trump?
Bingo.
Might it be Epstein? Right. So now that crowd is getting to see in real time, even though they're wrong, it doesn't matter that they're wrong. They believe they're watching a president of the United States who has been blackmailed by the Epstein operation, which is an Israeli Mossad CIA operation, being told what to do on the grand stage with the most powerful weapons in the world. You couldn't script that any better. Eventually, they'll be proven wrong. They'll be brought to the right side. But that's why you can't like lose your mind when a certain audience goes in the wrong direction, because you can just stop and say to yourself, all right, well, what lesson are they learning? You're establishing that that's possible, which is the most difficult thing. Then you can kind of guide them back. No, it wasn't Trump. It was actually all these other people. The other thing that Tucker Carlson is beating the drum about is the neocons and people that go down the road of the neocons, and they'll come across the same thing. Oh, look, they're controlled. AIPAC, Israel, Epstein. So, to your point, you might not expect it, but you're saying, well, we're not distracting it. It's not distracting anybody from Epstein. To me,
it's highlighting
it's highlighting it, and it's highlighting it on a much more important stage. And I'm going to get killed for this. I always do. Than simply children on an island. And I always have to say that doesn't mean I don't care about children. The new thing, Patriots, I get people in my chat say, "Well, Dave doesn't have children, so he doesn't care about the kids." Okay, that's not true. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of the info war, and it's one thing to teach Americans that some of their favorite politicians and sports stars and Hollywood stars are being controlled by a Mossad blackmail operation. It's another thing to think that the President of the United States and the Congress and the Supreme Court, which Trump highlighted as well, is being controlled on the grand stage of things as far as kinetic warfare by a blackmail operation. And That's quite frankly where you have to get a certain percentage of the populace if you ever want exact justice. It's got to go well beyond our shores.
Right. And how many people out there actually believe at this point that the reason we haven't seen arrests for Epstein in the U.S. is because there's some sort of blackmail going on with the DOJ. There's some sort of, I mean, that's even though people may not be saying it out loud, you know that they're starting to think it. Mm-hmm. You know that they have to be wondering, and we've got all this information. I mean, why were they stonewalling it for so long? Why are they redacting all this information? And now that the information has come out, how come the Epstein files haven't turned into the Epstein trials? That's a big talking point out there that was, I mean, before Iran kind of took over the narrative space. I mean, everybody was talking about that. And you can only imagine people have to be connecting the dots and saying to themselves, well, there's got to be a reason that they don't want to go down this road. There's got to be a reason that Pam Bondi is acting the way she is, or Kash Patel is making these seemingly contradictory statements and telling us that we need to all rally around Israel and focus on Israel and anti-Semitism, and it's like beating us over the head with it. After a while, it gets to be, I mean, the noticing doesn't get all that difficult, right? And I think that's really what it all comes down to. And it's amazing how they've now taken it, like you just pointed out, from Epstein Island to and really broadened it. I know you've been talking a lot about this as well. It seems to be, and we can maybe pivot here a little bit into Epstein and some of the I guess stuff going on with that the action is going to be primarily spearheaded by foreign countries. That seems to be the direction that we're headed at this point. I mean, we had obviously former Prince Andrew. We had Peter Mandelson, who you mentioned a little while ago. There's a long list. I compiled a list a while back. There's so many names of people who have stepped down from their positions. People have been arrested. One, the former, I think it was Norwegian prime minister, attempted suicide. And so all this stuff is going on overseas. And you've got Poland that's spearheading their own investigation into child trafficking and into Epstein. You've got, and this is sort of on an unrelated, this is more on the COVID front, but you got Robert Malone being tapped to lead up a committee on the UN talking about bioweapons, which of course ties into COVID. So it seems like it's moving offshore. So I guess we can maybe pivot here and talk a little bit about that. Again, this has sort of been put on the back burner, but as we've demonstrated tonight, all of these different ingredients are coming together here. We've got the Zorro Ranch investigation that's going on. They're searching for the dead bodies there. You had Joe Rogan going at it with Michael Schellenberger the other day, the drama over Epstein. So where do you want to start with that? How do you want to dig into Epstein? Talk a little bit about where you see this headed in terms of the foreign element and where we're at with that.
Well, I just want to highlight something that you discussed there, right? It's the I think the medium term thing that people need to keep their eyes on is exactly what you just so eloquently described, right? The fact that the design of this is starting to focus the everyone's eyes not really off our shores. And what's one of the common threads? All right, so we just went into the the Iranian war, as it might be, even though it's not a war, it's not starting a war, it's ending a war. And we just highlighted Israel, blackmail, and potential actions that people like Tucker are talking about. Then you move on to the other topic du jour, which is 2020. And all the chatter that's out there right now is about information coming down the pipeline in the coming days and weeks regarding foreign interference in our elections, right? Exactly word for word off the executive order that Donald Trump wrote 8 years ago in September. 2 weeks ago,
those pesky EOs that just
get you every time. I mean, thank God Biden didn't extend that thing 3 times.
I know, right? It would have been really tragic.
Yeah. Whoops. So that's got a foreign component. All the major booms that have come in so far, the former prime minister in Norway, Peter Mandelson, all the people in Europe, has been foreign. And it hasn't been about children. It's been about government corruption, selling of state secrets, right? So they're zooming people's eyes out to much larger geopolitical crimes than just what happened on the island. A couple weeks ago, you had the Supreme Court step in and optically try to stop Trump's tariffs. Again, a larger geopolitical topic. And what did Trump come in? This is the first time he said this openly the way he did. He made it very clear that the decision, he wasn't happy with the decision, and that there was foreign interference within the Supreme Court, right? He was tying that decision that went against the wishes and the will and the benefit of the American people to foreign influence, right? So every direction now, no matter which avenue you want to go to get down, is starting to bring in the concept of foreign influence in our country. That's how you get to tribunals. That's how you get to public, potential public military intervention and Article 2 powers and things like that. It has to be really a foreign attack, even though we got the justification on the homeland. Optically, people accept it better, and you have to zoom. And by the way, so what's the common thread in all that? Well, ultimately, every one of those things, I think not only can be, but will be tied back to the greater Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Israeli Mossad, Five Eyes blackmail operation, which of course rolls back into the Bank of London as well, right? But you have to work your way up the ladder. So they're now taking all the problems that were happening in the country and zooming it out and connecting the spider web outside our shores to this. And to me, that's why Israel is saved for last, because ultimately, yes, it goes up to the bankers, goes up to the city of London. But what was the as far as a spoken hub, what was the hub for all those topics we just had? What was the vehicle by which they were all controlled? It was a Mossad blackmail operation. So to me, we could pick any direction you want to go in here. It's not pivoting away from Epstein. No, it's building the case. Maybe the normies don't see it yet, but you start establishing that. Wait a second, because Patriot, the thing, I think the biggest hurdle, well, one of the biggest hurdles you have when you're trying to red pill somebody, I don't mean about Q, I just mean about all the things we just said, is for the first time in a long time, you have a mass populace where people at the very minimum are starting to say, like you said earlier, something's not right. And then what they've been presented with over and over and over again, in particular over the last 5 years, whether it's men and women's sports, whether it's the transgender agenda, whether it's the border, whether it's the vaccine mandates, everything that is happening, the one consistent amongst many is the government is constantly going against the will of the people. You take the Save America Act right now, okay?
Mhm.
91% issue amongst Republicans, 76% amongst liberals, a blended 86% issue. No matter what demo group you go to, it's north of 75%, in most cases north of 80. It should be a slam dunk. And no matter what they do, the government can't get it done. And so consistently people are looking for the why. Like, yeah, I know the government's corrupt, but like they can't understand why it's so ridiculous now that everything they're doing is going against the will of the people. Well, you start to introduce, if you can actually teach people the concept of blackmail, then it's suddenly there's your why. People are looking for a why. So as you start to establish that everything goes back, once you start to crack that notion, then everything you're seeing on the television becomes suddenly very plausible, because now you have a why for what didn't make sense to people before.
That's so brilliant, man. Absolutely. And that simple question of something is not right. Isn't that where we all began? I mean, you and I, everybody out there listening, that was really the fundamental question that started us on our journey. No matter whether you've been awake for 5 minutes or whether you've been awake for 30 years. I mean, that really is where it all begins. Something is not right. And then you start to dig a little bit. You start to search for the why, because you can't. And the way that they're presenting the optics is that people are. It used to be in the past that people, they might scratch their head about something and say, "Geez, that doesn't really make sense," but they get distracted by a million other things and it would just kind of fade off, and they just sort of get cynical about it and just say, "Well, this is just the way things are." But now we're living in a time where the normies are literally being bombarded every single day with things that don't make sense. And the SAVE Act is an absolutely brilliant example. I mean, people are looking at John Thune. I wouldn't want to be that guy right now. But everyone's looking at this and saying this is something that the entire country wants. And we've talked about this in a different context too, about with the filibuster, getting rid of the filibuster so that we'd be able to have the America First agenda, be able to have Trump's all of his initiatives go through, and how really that's reflective of this broader idea that more and more people are coming to recognize that the government doesn't actually work for the people. So who do they work for? And then if you tie that in to the foreign piece and you say, well, wait a second, if they're not working for the American people, and then we've got this Epstein blackmail situation going on that they don't really seem to want to do anything about. They're reluctant about it. They're dragging their heels because the people are demanding it, like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these people who are getting vilified by all of the people who don't really understand the way that the game is being played. People start to question that and they say, well, wait a second, if they're not working for the American people, who are they working for? And we've got this Epstein situation where, I mean, it still hasn't become very, I mean, the blackmail element of it hasn't really come into the narrative space quite yet. At
Right.
this point, we're still dealing with, okay, the satanic ritual abuse, and by the way, not to minimize any of this stuff, but they're front loading all of the evil, I think, to get everybody shocked and to get everybody paying attention.
Yep.
But then the subsequent question then becomes, well, what was all this about? Is this just evil for evil's sake, or was there something else that was going on? Was this used as a control mechanism? And I think that's where they're going to start to, to ultimately to connect those dots for people. And then on a kind of zooming out a little bit more, who's pulling all of those strings? And that's why we're seeing so many things happen overseas, but they're not happening over here. And once the people start to connect those dots and realize, well, it's actually a foreign power or foreign powers, or perhaps it might be this cabal that all of these crazy conspiracy theorists have talked about, that are really above the cloud line of government, that are actually controlling all of this stuff. Well, that opens up, like you said, because the whole idea of a overt military takeover. I mean, if our government is occupied by a foreign power, if that's ultimately what the way that they script it out to the people and they show all the people, I mean, we hear that line all the time. We're an occupied country. That's true. I mean, not anymore, but I mean, ultimately, those are the optics that are creating the replay to show everybody we're an occupied nation. Well, that at that point, and you tie in the stolen elections, and you show everybody that these individuals weren't even elected by the people, that this was election fraud was facilitated overseas by this shadowy group, whoever they are. Well, all of a sudden it becomes a kind of a hop, skip, and a jump there to get the general public to not only acquiesce to, but to actually ask for military intervention to restore our sovereignty, to bring these people to justice. So you can kind of see the roadmap that they might be traveling down. I'm not saying that's necessarily the exact order or sequence of events, but it seems very likely that that's the direction that they're headed. And quite frankly, we spent a lot of time talking about the insurrection that was happening here, the judicial tyranny, the whole idea of these mass riots that are going to be staged and the mass deportations, and having that be the vehicle or the mechanism to bring in the military. But I think you make a really good point that there's going to be, I think there might be a little bit too much opposition to that, because that's going to be viewed as the military is ultimately taking action against American citizens. But when it's looked at through the proper lens, which is the military is being used to liberate our nation that's actually occupied by a foreign power on behalf of by all of these people whom they blackmailed, well, that's a pretty easy sell, a relatively easy sell compared to, we got to bring in the military to squash these protests and bring all of these governors that Trump doesn't like to justice and so forth. I think that probably runs a much greater risk of having far more opposition by the people. And we know that the entire purpose of this operation, no matter how it's going to go down, like X-22, Dave has said for years, like the people have to be on the side of Trump. And ultimately they have to, well, I mean, that's the way that he phrases it, but really, I think more accurately, it's the people have to be on the side of, first of all, understanding the nature of the conflict that we're in, the nature of the problem that needs to be solved, and ultimately on the side of the military, if that's the direction they go. I mean, but it seems to me very likely that we could be headed in that direction.
And you said a key thing. The people have to be on Trump's side, but you're not going to be on Trump's side if you don't understand who the players are.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. That's
I always have a fun thought experiment where somebody will be like spouting off at the mouth about arresting somebody. I go, okay, who are you going to arrest? Hillary Clinton, not going to change a thing. Barack Obama, not going to change a thing.
It's just going to cause more chaos, really.
So, right. So
unless people understand why they're being arrested.
Right. And who is actually behind them? Like Skycatcher in your chat said something very prolific. I think the U.S. has way more to worry about from Britain than Israel. City of London equals monetary control. That's exactly right. Israel is an agent of the City of London. Well, what are we doing right now? Right? That's funny, Patriot. Where has most of the fallout been so far from the Epstein files? Oh, that's right, the United Kingdom. Funny how that works, right? City of London. But what do we have to do? We have to work people up the ladder. Like, think about it. When Trump came down that escalator in 2015, he started campaigning in 2016. Who do we all think was the problem? Oh, it's Hillary. It's Obama. And then what do you learn after that? Well, then you start learning about AIPAC, and you start learning about, Israel. You start learning about the intelligence agencies. You start learning about Five Eyes, and you keep zooming out and out and out. And then eventually you learn about the Mossad Israeli deep state being agent of what? City of London, the bankers, right? You have to work people up the ladder. That's why Trump started out in 2019 and 2020 talking about the people, the controllers, the people whose names you don't even know.
That's right.
Because you have everyone out there screaming that they want somebody arrested, and absolutely nobody can agree right now on who needs to be arrested. Like I tell people, write down 20 people that you want arrested and hung right now. And I guarantee the 20 that most people write down, probably myself included, wouldn't solve the problem. So if we don't even understand it, do you think the masses do? You have to build the case as to what the actual problem is. And now with this thing, the deployment of the Epstein files in January, and the word foreign being injected into the Supreme Court, into our Congress, into election fraud, into everything. Now you're starting to see the case being built. And it's interesting because I think maybe Saturday night, at some point over the next couple weeks, I'm gonna go back and go through a summary of Executive Order 13848, because I think people need to pay very close attention to the language in there. Because a lot of people say, oh, it's foreign interference in an election, so that doesn't cover our government and the media. Read the language. The language talks about foreign interference with a foreign nation, but then it also talks about foreign agents. Well, guess what? If Dave from News Fusion takes money from somebody to lie about the election, I'm now a foreign agent, right? So it had that component in there, but the point is, it was designed in a way to trap the source of it, but then also trap all the agents and the media and everything else that were. If you're a congressman and you took AIPAC money or wherever the foreign money is, and you did something wrong, you're now a foreign agent. So it was designed to trap everybody. But that's why I think the stuff that John Solomon and actually General Flynn, coincidentally enough, shocker, have been chirping about the last few days about, we had we're told the FBI go into Maricopa and seize ballots and all those other things. And now, right after that happens, you have Flynn and Solomon and others making the rounds, chirping about foreign interference, evidence of foreign interference coming out. And that, to me, is one of the balls that needs to drop to start the process of getting us to exactly what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. I mean, they're talking about Maricopa, this Fulton County, all that stuff going on, but really the broader picture, the bigger picture is what foreign nations were involved. And John Solomon mentioned China, and as we know, there are were deep state elements in all of these different countries. I mean, that's the other thing you have to keep in mind. And sometimes people kind of conflate things and they say, well, how could China be involved if Xi Jinping's on our side? Or how could Russia be involved if Putin's on our side? Well, guess what? It's the same deal. They've got deep state elements. They've got good guys and bad guys in their country. And it really is about getting to the top of the pyramid, because none of this stuff, it's almost like when you think about the presidential election, that's what everybody's focused on is the president, who's going to be the president. But there's also the down ballot stuff, right? And I think what we've been focusing on is like all the down ballot players, all the puppets, the people that we hate for obvious reasons, that we know are criminals, that we know are evil, but removing them doesn't exorcise the cancer. It doesn't really fully paint a picture. It doesn't educate the people as to what the real problem was, where it was coming from, who was actually pulling the string. So in essence, you really have to build that case gradually and show everybody who is really sitting at the top of the pyramid. And then it becomes relatively easy to arrest all of their agents. And, but you kind of have to, like we said over and over, it's a process of bringing all this information into the court of public opinion. but at the same time, also providing enough information for the public to gradually build to be able to see the full picture, because only then are they going to accept, like Trump said, you know, when we do what needs to be done, people will accept it. I think we're kind of in that phase right now. And earlier on in the process, we might have, you know, we might have not even anons, even people, you know, people like us, we might have not really recognized how important it was to make sure that everybody understood the grand design before they actually started making those moves and reenacting the arrests and the execution.
That's the key thing, right? That's what I hope everyone is starting to realize now. You know, people used to hate when Q said it had to be this way. What do you mean it had to be this way? It didn't need to be this way. Yeah, it did, because of everything you're describing, right?
Yeah.
Everyone go back to January 20th of 2020, right? 2021, excuse me. Now, for the majority of the audience, myself included, you just watched Joe Biden get inaugurated, right? It wasn't until some people saw it that day. Most people didn't. Most people didn't start to figure out all the trickery until after. And it was, you know, one of the greatest rug pulls of the Q movement that there's been.
Yeah.
Well, if you stopped everyone that day and asked them, hey, they just stole the election and the presidency, who do we have to take out? People would have said Obama, the Clintons, Joe Biden, the Democrats, those people putting paper up on the window, Fox News, and Dominion.
Right.
Nobody would have gotten to foreign, even though, yeah, we got some rumblings about, ES&S and Smartmatic with Venezuela and Leonardo in Italy with their military incursions on our elections, and Frankfurt, the servers. Yeah, you had some of that, but nobody would have been pointing at intelligence agencies as much, or Israel, or the city of London, or oh my God, they were using Epstein to blackmail people to rig the election. People weren't making those connections. Yeah, I'm sure there's somebody in the audience who's going to say I was. The bulk of the people weren't, right? So that's now you're seeing, to your point, why Trump told you we caught them all at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's what he said the night of the election. Remember, 3:02 in the morning, he had the press conference. There's people trying to. We're up big. They're trying to steal it. We're not going to let them happen. We call it all. That was the night of the election. Oh my God, why has it been 6 years and nothing's happened? Because the people in the movement and at the country at large had absolute. First of all, most people didn't even know it was rigged. Then the ones that did could not have possibly fathomed. They just wanted it. Well, it was the Clintons, but no, it was everything we're talking about now, no matter which topic it is, whether we're talking about Charlie Kirk, or talking about Iran, or talking about Epstein, or talking about the financial system, or all of it points back way outside of our borders, right? The Clintons and the Bidens and Dominion, that is just, those are the symptoms of the illness. They're not the root of the illness. So it took all this time for it to be laid out to the public, for it to be mapped out, for the anons to understand it, for the alt media to understand it. And now we're getting to the phase where it's being pushed out to the masses, and it will take a little bit of time. But if you had actually just pulled the plug in 2020 or 2021, first of all, you would have had a massive revolt because not enough people understood it. And then what were you going to do? Like, what are you going to haul, some Mossad deep state agent in front of a tribunal in 2021? People would be like, who the hell is this guy? Like, how does this connect to our election?
Yeah, right.
Now it's a whole different story.
It's true. Yeah.
And what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Hang them and then go back 5 years later and be like, now let me explain to you why we did this 5 years ago. People wouldn't care at that point. It's in and out of the news cycle. It would have been over.
It's so true, because it's kind of funny. I'm thinking here, and it's like, it's not as if in the early days I wasn't aware of the Rothschilds and I wasn't aware of all of these foreign powers that were pulling the strings. But yet, when I kind of war gamed the whole situation out back in those days, I thought it was going to be like, okay, this is America going to be ground zero. It's all going to go down here first, and then it's going to spread out, and then we're going to go after these other players and all of these foreign countries and so forth. Once the big event happens here. But it's actually, it makes perfect sense that they would do the absolute inverse of that they would paint the full picture first before they actually drop the hammer, because at that point, it's like you said, you mentioned a key thing there. People revolt. People, you get chaos when people don't understand. When something is happening that is really jarring and really shocking, that's dangerous enough, but it's incredibly dangerous when people don't understand why it's happening. And then they
Mhm.
become susceptible to all types of manipulation and propaganda. And that's why we would have ended up in a total shitstorm had
Yep.
we gotten what we wanted back in 2021. So here we sit all these years later with an entirely different perspective. And this is really one of the first questions. I mean, one of the real uh, first substantive discussions that I've had on this topic with anybody. You know, only recently have we really started to see this from a different perspective now that the Epstein files came out, and we're starting to see all of the action take place elsewhere, and we're wondering, well, why is that? Oh, okay, I think we just kind of laid it out. It makes perfect sense. And once people, it's not that we're all going to agree on everything. We're all going to have our differences, and we're not we're not going to turn all the normies into anons overnight. We're not going to take all the liberals and turn them into conservatives. That's not the point. But once everybody understands that the common enemy has been playing against all of us against each other, and has been using via blackmail through the city of London and all these different foreign powers, and Israel, of course, uh, they've been using all of these individuals to pit us against one another. And they've been involved in all this horrific evil, the child trafficking, the satanic ritual abuse. I mean, sure, absolutely. I still believe, like you told us, that's going to be the common thread that unites people across party lines. But it's not just the actual satanic ritual abuse. It's the full picture of what it was being used for as a control mechanism, and to pit all of us against each other in this divide and conquer strategy. And once the penny drops on that, you talk about unification. I mean, people are going to be like, "Holy shit!" Right? It's going to change the entire landscape permanently. So,
Yep. That's
yeah,
exactly right.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, all right, man. Well, we I'm just kind of blown away that at how good this conversation has turned. We always have great conversations, but this is like we're really kind of getting to the heart of the matter here. This is great.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
let me add one quick thing to what you were talking about there, and then it may be the number one enemy of people, but it's also making sense now why nothing has been done with the media, right? I think this may not make people happy, but I think the media will be probably one of the last places that you see arrests, because
Yep.
you look at everything you just laid out. You have to first establish what's going on. Then you have to establish why it's going on, who's controlling it, who goes up to the top of the tip of the spear, so to speak, right? Then you have to, after you establish all that, then you have to go, okay, who are the accessories, right? Who are the people that helped to cover it up, whether it be the election fraud
Mm,
or
yep.
COVID or Russiagate or anything else, right? In other words, people, again, they're not good. People, the average person can't yet. Yeah, we're at a point now where people understand the media lies. They understand. Some people understand there's money involved in influence. People can't quite understand yet just how scripted and controlled everything is, and they're literally agents of the intelligence agencies. Well, once you
Mhm.
can identify this giant web of corruption, influence, and blackmail that's controlling everything, well, then it becomes easy. If you can blackmail a president, of course you can blackmail the guy at ABC News and everything else like that. So I think that all this other stuff will also lead to that, right? You take any one of these topics like 2020, and you establish that it was foreign. You establish that as the intelligence agencies. You establish that really people like Hillary and Biden and all them are just agents of that control mechanism. Then it becomes very easy to get people to the media side of things and how they're used to influence, manipulate, and corrupt and cover these things up.
That's a fantastic point. Great idea to tie the media into it as well. Because I mean, and again, I think about it as like the president, and then like all the down ballot. Like the media is way down in terms of the pyramid structure. You've got the controllers up at the very top. The people behind the scenes that most people don't even. I mean, a lot of folks out there are hearing the name. I mean, they've heard the name Rothschild associated with banking, obviously in the past, but they're hearing Rothschild. They're hearing these names associated with Epstein and all this sinister activity for the first time. So, I mean, the people really at the top of the pyramid, and then what in essence really is the deep state, which are the intelligence agencies that work for them. And then ultimately down from there, you get all of the politicians who they control through the blackmail. And then you kind of just go down there from the media and all the propagandists, the people who are, who essentially, I mean, that's what the media is. The media is a shield to divert attention away from the way the world really works. And it's also interesting as well, because I think about, earlier in our discussion, we were talking about the early days of some of the things we were talking about back in 2021, 2022, et cetera. And it was always about the media. We've got to get the media. Nobody's ever going to wake up as long as they're being propagandized by the media. And there's still a lot of truth to that. But again, we were thinking in a lot of ways, kind of the inverse of the way that the white hats are actually, it seems anyway, the way that the white hats are rolling all of this out. You expose the people at the top, and then you expose the intelligence agencies, you expose the puppets that are the politicians, the celebrities, etc., and then the propagandists, the media, and you just kind of go down from there. So
and you utilize your influence and control over the media on the bad side to organically show people what they are. And again, if people want to get me to push back, I'll push back. People want to say no one will wake up until the media starts telling the truth, are just flat out wrong. You can't sit there and come at me with that line when you see CNN and MSNBC have lost 83% of their audiences in the last 4 years. Like the statistics go against what we're emotionally saying, right?
Yeah.
And somebody the other day said something to the effect of like what we're doing is brainwashing, and I couldn't disagree more. Brainwashing would be letting CNN come out and tell everybody that 2020 was rigged. Now, why do I say that? Because what is happening, what's been happening by design over the last, in particular, the last 5 years, is yes, the views of the world and CNNs and things like that. Of course, they're still optically pushing an anti-Trump narrative, but mixed in with that are, like Mike King calls it, these truth bombs or truth landmines, right? Where people they inject a little bit of truth, and then what else do they inject? Insanity, right? And little by little, eventually statistics show that people are sitting there and whatever it may be, insanity, hatred, flat out lies being exposed over and over, the constant rug pulls on the leftist media are causing people to turn it off, right? That's what the numbers prove. Yep. Well, that is not because we have red pilled them. That's because people on their own are reaching the conclusion, right? We all know this by now. There is no more powerful event in an awakening than when somebody organically on their own has the light bulb go on, they realize they're being lied to or they're not getting the truth, and that caused them to start to seek new options. So when the crowd says, well, we should just, have the media tell them the truth. No, that would be continuing the brainwashing. Because if CNN went to their audience that they have been MK Ultra brainwashing with government level Mockingbird media psyops for the last 40 years since CNN came into being, if they suddenly came around and started telling the truth, what would that do to that last 20%? It would strengthen their bond with CNN. It wouldn't break them away from the legacy media, which is what the goal is. It would endow them to the legacy media, right?
So true,
instead of getting them to shut the thing off and ripping that whole system down, if you took the legacy media and just made them start telling the truth and praise Trump and everything, well, what lesson is the public going to learn from that? They would now simply trust NBC, and then you're opening these people up to not learning that lesson and potentially falling prey to corruption of that system down the road. Versus if somebody sees it, steps away, they're never going to go back and let that happen to themselves again.
That's right. And in the early days, we kind of thought that would be the approach that they would take, because we saw that as the most expedient way. Well, all of these people are brainwashed by the media. So, if we can just take over the media and start getting the media to tell the truth, then people would wake up faster. That was like the general thinking, but we weren't really seeing the broader picture, which is it's not really about that. It's really about what you said is it's getting people to organically come to a place, and we can kind of put that in quotation marks because they are being manipulated, obviously, by the scene
Mhm.
behind the scenes, but uh, in their perception, for them to come to an organic understanding that the media is lying to them, which again is also a fundamentally important part of awakening. Like I said earlier, it all starts with the something's wrong here. Why is that? And then you start to realize that the media is lying to you. The information you're being given is false, and that leads you on your journey. And that, in essence, is what they're trying to do with the masses. They're trying to basically herd everybody in that direction. And we didn't anticipate in those early days, at least I didn't, and I don't think a lot of us. I mean, I never heard this narrative in those days that the white hat approach was going to be to very quietly infiltrate the mainstream media, and as Mike King puts it, to inject. Well, he says that to take over the illusion making machine, which is accurate, and to start injecting poison pills in terms of getting people to gradually go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, or that doesn't match with what I'm seeing, it doesn't match with what other people are saying, it just doesn't feel right, or any combination of that. So it was really this very subtle but brilliant way of very quietly infiltrating the mainstream media, continue to prop it up, to continue the illusion of having it be the mainstream media of old, so that it could gradually discredit itself. And
Yep.
that people, I mean, at this stage of the game, you have to be wondering. I mean, just like with Iran, yeah, I'm sure you saw that montage video, or some of the montage videos that people put together of short-term pain for long-term gain. They're basically mimicking the mainstream, the Mockingbird media. And I would imagine at this point, a lot of people are starting to recognize that. We're back in 2020, 2021. People were too asleep, and they just kind of heard the same message, and they were under the spell, the MK Ultra. But now they're gradually coming out of the spell. MSM credibility's in the toilet. So when they see short-term pain for long-term gain, the same exact phrase being repeated on across the spectrum of mainstream media, they're starting to go, wait a second, and that's really the whole point. It's to get people to awaken to the fact that the media is and has always been a propaganda machine used to insulate and protect the deep state interests.
Yeah, the drops speak about a number of times. I'm just paraphrasing one. One in particular says, you awake and thinking for yourself is their
That
greatest
they fear
fear.
the most. Yeah,
Well,
right.
you don't learn to think for yourself by turning on NBC and having them suddenly start reporting the news factually. That's not
Mhm.
learning to think for yourself. That's staying in the same echo chamber that you've been in your entire life, that you've been brainwashed.
Yeah.
The only way you start to think for yourself is by first realizing you haven't been thinking for yourself, right? I.e., realizing that you've been lied to, you've been manipulated. And there
Correct.
is simply no other way to do that than the way they're doing it right now. That's one thing you don't have to like it, but if somebody can name everyone, every time we do one of these shows, there's all sorts of stories in the chat. Every night we all have the same stories about, nightmares about trying to wake people up. We all know it doesn't work. That's why Q says you can't tell people, you have to show them. So I'll be happy to pass it up to the chain to all the intel contacts that I don't have about a better way to do it. But I've never heard somebody come up with a better way to do it, because there's just not a way. EBS, none of that stuff works. You have to. It is different things in different narratives for different audiences. It's not the same thing for everybody. That causes that light bulb to go on.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's an important point, because that comes up all the time. I even saw. I'm not criticizing anybody, but even as we're talking about it, I saw some people tonight say, "Well, no, they don't have to praise Trump. They could just start reporting the news factually." But again, reporting the news factually would keep that last 10, 20%, whatever it is. That would just keep them glued to that same NBC News channel, and people would not learn how to think for themselves. They would continue to just feed off the nipple of the same channel that's been controlling them their whole lives. They won't ever learn that they've been controlled.
That's so true, man.
It's like a
Absolutely.
cult. A cult doesn't turn. Why is a cult a cult? Because typically people don't realize they're in a cult, right? that's the weapon they use. That's why you never get out of one, because the cult isn't going to turn around and say, "Hey, by the way,
We're brainwashed.
we've been brainwashing you since you're 9 years old. Now you're 30. Like, go out and have a good time." They don't do that. That's the nature of a cult, right? It's somebody has to figure it out on their own, which is very difficult to do. And then, just like everyone here went through, then it's a rough process realizing and accepting that, whatever period of time it is that you've been mind controlled. But the good news, if you like groupthink, is there's not too many people in this world, especially in this country, that haven't been mind controlled all their life. That's the nature of what we're all realizing right now.
That's right. That's right. And some of these revelations that we're even having as Anons and as awakened people years later about the nature of this operation and how it's actually being deployed and how it's being carried out and the reasons for it. I mean, it's like our mutual friend Mike King always says, initially we may not understand something, we may be opposed to it, we may think. I mean, you go back to even in more recent history when Trump came back, when he was elected again, he came back in January. And the prevailing wisdom at that period in time was, okay, well, we just went through 4 years of fake Biden. He was a walking, talking red pill. A whole bunch of people have woken up in the process. The country's ready. We can just hit the ground running and open up the floodgates. It may take a few weeks, may take a few months, whatever. But, we thought we were there. Right. We thought we were there. And it's kind of like that's really been a big source of frustration for so many of us because and that's why people kind of fall off the wagon and get blackpilled and so forth along the way at certain points because our expectations aren't met. Why are our expectations not met? Well, it's because we don't really fully see the full picture yet, even as Anons. Like it's one thing to understand the truth. I mean, but there's another, it's a whole different level to understand how and why it happened, right? And I think early on we were so focused on getting people to recognize the truth about COVID, the truth about the stolen election, the truth about the fact that Joe Biden wasn't really Joe Biden, on and on and on. I mean, we could make a list for days. We wanted to red pill people on these things, but that's really like we weren't really thinking big enough, right? The truth is like getting people to understand what happened, but the Great Awakening is getting people to understand why and how it happened. That's really what this is all about.
That's so prolific, dude. You're absolutely right. I can echo that. I was topic focused back then.
Yeah.
I'll feel better if I can get them to understand COVID, or I'll feel better if I can get them to believe that Trump isn't bad or Biden didn't win. And then exactly right. You just eventually you and it's a process. I don't know too many people that figure this out overnight. I think hence why this thing did take so long.
Yeah.
Because I think they understood, it goes back to everything we've been talking about this show, right? The way we're zooming out, we're taking the masses and we're zooming out the narrative from just United States and elections and Epstein to this giant geopolitical web of influence and blackmail and everything else. Well, it's the same thing with us, right? We've all been taken, those of us in the Q communities, especially, from the notion of topic specific or good guy versus bad guy to understanding that ultimately, in many cases, good and bad and certain players don't matter. It's being able to zoom out and just the goal is, like Hugh says, it's getting people to free your minds. That let's face it, that is the goal of all this.
Yeah,
is to free people's minds. And so it takes, you're right, it takes a while to get to that point.
Yeah. It's been a journey for us too. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing to treat the symptoms. It's another thing to cure the disease. That's kind of another way of looking at it. No, you pick your metaphor, but I think that's ultimately what this is all about, is getting people to see the big picture, the grand picture. And it's not as if we as Anons and awakened patriots haven't been aware of that bigger picture, but being focused on the individual issues as opposed to getting our minds around the idea that the way that this operation is playing out is they're thinking far bigger. And it's really all written into the Q drops. It's going to be biblical, the Great Awakening. I mean, when you really think about it, if people knew the truth about COVID, or people knew the truth about the stolen election, but they didn't really have the full context behind it, would it really be the Great Awakening? Probably not.
Exactly,
I would argue.
right.
No. So, all right, man. Well, what else have we not covered? We covered quite a bit tonight. Anything else you wanted to mention on 2020, on Actually, I saw. Did you see the Candace Owens video where she actually connected her to Epstein? I thought that
No,
was
you have
interesting.
that?
Yeah, I think I do. Let me see here. We're kind of backtracking a little bit, but that's okay. Because again, really what we're talking about here is how all these different narratives are woven together. We talked about Iran tonight. We talked about Epstein. We talked about Charlie Kirk, which obviously involves Erica, connected to Epstein. So let's watch this. Oh wait, I should probably share it first.
I got to very quickly before you play that highlight my favorite comment I might have seen in months. I don't know which chat this was. I think it's over on PIOSON Pawn said, actually, the emergency broadcast system is blasting for the last 10 years. Yes.
Boom.
Yep. Exactly right.
I love that.
That's how it goes. Not 72 hours. I am on board with that. I would say blaring even on high for the last 5 years.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right, so let's watch this. That crazy Candace Owens, man. She's up to it again.
Really gone off the rails, Patriot.
Their next model management in New York City, Faith Cates, who was the co-founder of it, had to step down because of her involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. She's like in his emails like 4,000 times. Even after he got arrested for pedophilia, she's like, I will never betray you. I will never, ever betray you. Like, I've got your back to the end. She was very close. I mean, look, she's inviting him here in this email to her son's bar mitzvah. And this person said, just so you know, Erica was involved with Next Model Management, right? So this is a tip. And this person did not work with Next Model Management. So I was like, okay, tip, let's see where it leads, kind of investigate things. And I kind of reach into some old contact cards. I'm going, that would be very curious because Next Model Management apparently had tons of Eastern European girls all around the office. And like I said, you can look more into the Faith Cates thing, but it's not great. It's not great. The relationship that Faith Cates had with Jeffrey Epstein, Eastern European models all around Next Model Management office. He was helping this model agency in particular. And so I decided to see if I could get some more people to verify that Erica was involved. What was she doing? Was she modeling? No. Well, I was able to confirm it, not just once, not twice, 3 times, 4 times with people with direct knowledge that Erica Kirk was multiple times taking meetings at Next Model Management and dealing with the people like the suits that would surround Faith Cates, people like Jeffrey Epstein. Now, they did not say they saw her meeting with Jeffrey Epstein, but they said essentially Jeffrey Epstein was always there because he was so close with Faith. This cannot be denied. You can go through their emails. They're very close. And so he would sometimes come in and he would take a meeting. And so he would just kind of, when you're friends with someone, I'm going to take an office, and nobody knew what the context of these meetings were. They are saying that in meetings like that, meaning Erica was not there because of a modeling contract or because they don't know why she was there. They don't know why Erica was in that same category of suits, right? Of just like suits, and they were not to ask questions, and Erica is there and she's taking meetings at Next Model Management. So now feeling 100% certain that this information was real, like I said, confirming it 4 ways, I decided to go out and ask Erica what she was doing there. Because if people with intimate knowledge situation don't know what she was doing there, that's not great, right? What are the chances? What does Erica have to do with Next Model Management? What is she doing there? And I went out to her and I, of course, copied the spokesperson, Andrew Colvet, and I said, what specifically were you doing at Next Model Management in New York City? What's up? What do you do? Did you run into Epstein? Like, I just want to know, like, what is your relationship with Faith? How about that? Give me the context of this. Crickets.
She is
Very
out of her. Listen, I'm not calling anybody out by name. It's just my opinion. Everyone's free to have their own. Every time we put on Erica Kirk, invariably we get folks in the chat that are like, yawn, I'm sick of this. It's not important.
Oh, it's just
respectfully, if you think 10 million people a night that are not anons right? And I don't even say 10. She gets about 3 to 6 million views on her podcast, and when you get shares, it's probably way more than 10, right? If you guys who want this thing to be over, right? When is it ending? When is it ending? Respectfully, if people don't understand the significance of 10, 20, 100 million non-anon level people discussing psyops and Erica Kirk and somebody not getting shot and connections to Israel, like if you don't see the importance of that, I don't know what we're all doing here. I would put Erica Kirk and Candace Owens near the top of the list in what's happening in the info space right now, as far as getting more people close to what we think. It's extremely important. And people that want it to end, like I said, I'm just guessing this could change tomorrow. It could change with this Iran stuff. But right now, if you had to get me to pick, like, what would be the quickest way to make a dent and to get to something like 9/11, which everyone's clamoring for? If I had to pick one thing in the entire world, it's Erica Kirk, because it is bigger than Donald Trump not getting shot. The Candace, the Charlie Kirk shooting, I'll call it a shooting, even though I didn't think it happened. As far as the norm, that is arguably one of the biggest stories of the last decade worldwide. And if you take that thing and at any point in the next 6 months, year, even 2 years, whatever it is, and you turn that on its ear and show the world that that's not what it seems, and it was done at the behest of an intelligence agency or Mossad or something, that is huge. So I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but we're here to try to help people at least understand what we see, and there's a reason we keep going back to that story. Because actually, the worst thing that could happen for our awakening would be for Candace Owens to go away tomorrow. That'd be the worst thing that could happen.
I totally agree.
Millions of people would suddenly stop talking about that.
That's right. And she's digging deeper and harder than anybody out there into all. I mean, I say digging. I mean, she's an operative. She's a Q operative. She's she's deployment of these narratives, and she's really at the tip of the spear. I mean, and quite honestly, I mean, she gets a lot of, like, we talked about. I mean, gosh, we're like way down the totem pole in terms of like our role in this operation. But even when we came out the night that Trump wasn't shot in Butler and we said it was all fake, look at the flack that we got. You can only imagine what it's like to be Candace Owens, right?
Yeah.
But nobody's doing this type of this narrative deployment, and she's got, like you said, millions and millions of followers. And as far as Erica Kirk, I mean, listen, I get how people, I mean, I can understand some of the sentiment around it. People just tired of hearing about it, talking about it. But that's because, again, it's sort of connected to what we were just talking about a moment ago in terms of the macro of the operation, not necessarily recognizing the significance very early on. I mean, obviously we all recognize the significance of Charlie Kirk being shot, but how many of us really understood or could have predicted where the storyline was going to go, right? This true. I believe this was the shot heard around the world that Q referenced in the drops because of what it's ultimately going to lead to. And now we're starting to see that picture become clearer with every passing day. We had no way of knowing in those early days. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I didn't really know anything about Erica Kirk prior to this whole event happening. But once I started to watch her and listen to her, I was like, man, something's really off about that lady. And I remember I put out a post on I think I have like 19,000 followers or something like that on X right now. When I put out this post, I had less than 10,000 followers. And it was of course the Instagram video that she put out with all of her jewelry on, and she was crying over the casket and all this stuff. And that post, and I just simply asked the question. I was like, who does this? Like, who allows themselves to be grieving, to be filmed while they're grieving over their husband who was shot? I mean, this is a very private, intimate moment. Who does this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. I wasn't even really making any assertions. And that one post got like over 7 million views or impressions on X. And it just goes to show you that a lot of people were thinking along the same lines. That there's something not right about this chick. But that being said, we didn't have any way of knowing where the script writers were going to take it. And now it's like, I mean, could you have imagined back in September or October or November of last year that we'd now be having these revelations about Erica Kirk perhaps being tied into Epstein?
No,
And
and that's why I don't get why we don't celebrate this stuff more. If you went back, yeah, to your point, Picture, if you went back to, I don't know, let's a year ago, March of 24, and you said, and we said to the people in our audience at that point, and the Anon audience in general, like, hey, do you think guys think it would be cool if like 20 million people on major podcasts were talking about somebody getting killed by the Israeli deep state, and the gun that you saw on television not being like, you think, and Joe Rogan, would that be cool? We're like, yeah, that's crazy, and now here we are. It's almost like it was a major turning point of the operation.
that's right. It was. Yeah. And I mean, her ex-boyfriends, I mean, you saw the picture of the guy, I forgot what his name is, with like pizza written on his underlip. Caleb, I forgot what the guy's name was, but that was really bizarre. I mean, Liz Crokin's been all over this stuff too. That's the other, that's it. I mean, we have to mention Liz in the context of this conversation. My goodness. Doesn't get the same amount of impressions as a Candace Owens, but I think in large part that's because she's been suppressed heavily for many, many years, but she's been right at the tip of the spear as well. So kudos to her. But I thought that would be an interesting tie-in as well, because it really, it involves this, connecting the dots between all these various different storylines that nobody ever really could have predicted were all kind of come together in the end. And I mean, I'm not saying we're necessarily at the end, but the fact that we're seeing all of these different pieces of the puzzle slide into place, I come to your own conclusions. But to me, I'll just say it's a very positive sign that we're, like I said earlier, you want to call it an inflection point, you want to call it crossing the Rubicon. I mean, you can use whatever term you want, but to me, it's very encouraging. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I got one more thing for you if you want, if you got a minute,
Sure.
because you mentioned it before. Just I think it might be a good place to kind of start to wrap up here.
Yeah.
As far as how do I put this? The way I look at it too is, again, obviously none of us know when and how things are going to happen, but a lot of times, I guess I've become, I don't want to say I'm jaded at all. I think what's happening is amazing, but you eventually learn that you can't predict things. But I think you do get pretty good at saying when we're not there yet. And the reason being is because I've finally come to understand, as far as freeing people's minds and getting them to think for themselves and all the things we just talked about. And also the other theme of what we've been discussing tonight, which is you can't fix a problem that people don't understand exists yet.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
I always use the analogy, my old builder developer analogy, is you're not going to walk into a house as a contractor and tell somebody they need an entire new foundation without showing them where the cracks are, right? And they're not going to let you just, hey, spend 50 grand. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
So then when somebody said, well, when are, like this year, a lot of people are asking what's going to happen. When are we going to see things happen with the financial system, the IRS, and the central bank? I had speculated, actually, we had speculated in this show as well, that, you're going to start to want to look for signal. What do we mean by signal? Like signs that they're injecting things into the mainstream lexicon that revolve around central banking, the Rothschilds, the City of London, right? In other words, you can't, as much as we want it to happen, you can't rip out Trump signaled a million times the IRS is going to be gone. We all believe that's going to happen. Yep. But you can't do it until you're not just going to flush people with cash without first getting a good majority of people to understand why, right? That what fiat currency is, how central banking is controlled, the role of the Fed, the illegality of the IRS. Certainly nobody can argue that the last 3 months have been focused on showing people that the government's stealing from them, right? Mike King pointed out a brilliant article yesterday. You and I talked a couple of weeks ago about part of one of the psyops that they ran earlier this year is, after all the Quality Leering Center and all that stuff came out, that you had people like MTG and even General Flynn highlighting people staging a tax revolt, right? Well, that was obviously all on our side. Mike King showed an article yesterday in The Guardian that says meet the Americans withholding their federal income tax to protest against Trump, right? So now they're saying, I don't want money spent. So now they're doing it
From both
to the
sides.
other side. So both sides are getting hit with, I have a reason to not pay my taxes, right? That's not accidental. That's fifth generation warfare. So you start to look for these things. And my long intro to this clip is that one of the things we noticed is it's not a secret that the Rothschilds, although arguably one of, if not the most powerful family in the world for the last however many hundreds of years, has been largely kept out of the public discourse, right? It's
Right.
not something that's discussed on CNBC or Fox News or anything. So you look for what are the signs that they're starting to inject that into the public, right? And we've gotten quite a number of them.
Oh yeah.
You had Les Wexner. We
Yeah.
showed it on this show. He came out and talked about it. And then not too long after that, you had Bill Clinton in his deposition talk about the Rothschilds. That got a lot of traction. Just on Monday, you had James Comer come out during the deposition of Jeffrey Epstein's accountant talking about 5 other major players that were paying this account money. One of them was the Rothschilds, right? We've seen it 2 or 3 times on occasion where the word Rothschilds has gone trending on X. You've had Jesse Waters inject them into his monologues, right? These are all signal, in my opinion, that are being put out to get the public to start talking about it. Seeing it trend on Twitter, something that's probably never happened before or very rarely, is a sign. So
I just popped out in my head when I saw the Rothschilds trending on. It's like,
yeah.
whoa.
So you can understand. Okay, now we're starting to introduce. We know the Rothschilds have connections, of course, to the bankers, the city of London. That's got connections to Israel. The Rothschilds gave the land where Israel is through the Balfour Declaration. That's not a conspiracy theory. You can watch a PBS interview where they state it. You can read the Balfour Declaration. Everything ties back. Obviously, Rothschild's connection to central banking, fiat currency. So this is a key thing that you're going to look for as far as signal of context being disseminated to the public regarding the financial system. So this has been getting a lot of traction. Things like this. It's nothing. This is not going to be anything revolutionary to the people watching in our audiences here. But I'm highlighting this because the fact that it's being discussed on X, on TikTok, on Instagram, it is very important to getting us to where we need to go on the financial system. So if you want to play a little bit of that down there, just to give you an idea what's going on.
Rothschilds come to America. Officially, it really started making noise about 1837. That was our first big crash. And what about after that? When they got here, what did they start doing? Businesses, infrastructure, railroads were big for them, and they would eventually start doing business with the mortgage, JP Morgan. Okay, so like, at what point did they grab our country by the balls? Well, that would be about 1895, 1896-ish. That's when JP Morgan and the Rothschilds bailed out the entire country of America because we're running out of gold. And so they said, hey, we have $45 million worth of gold. Want it? I imagine there was a little bit of, quid pro quo there. Daggone. And then there's 1910, the Jekyll Island meeting after the 1907 bank panic that led to the 1913 formation of the Federal Reserve. And that was all because of an island that they met at that was owned by JP Morgan and a boat that sank that was owned by JP Morgan that kept the Federal Reserve's naysayers from getting the meetings. And now we have a central bank that's controlled by Rothschild Rockefeller money. Jeez. And then that's not to mention the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, they pressured America heavy to finance it. Even the Civil War, they were on both sides in the Napoleonic War. And guess what? The first thing our central bank funded after it was founded in 1913. 1913, that would be, did they fund, oh God. 6 months later, World War I. Well, that's all bad, but at least it stopped. Shortly after that, Britain would write them a letter saying, hey, that land in the Middle East that you want, we're going to give it to you, Mr. Rothschild. Israel, it's all yours. Oh. The reason you can't afford an engagement ring or a wedding band, it's because of the Rothschilds and the De Beers Diamond Company. In the mid-80s, they created an M&A company. An M&A company is a merger and acquisition company. Think private equity, but before private equity. And guess what they did with we might need to slow down, but what did they do with it? They were using it to get involved in Wall Street. They wanted to infiltrate the New York Wall Street monster that had been forming in America. You want to know what they did to do that? No. What did they do? He did it by sending somebody to New York City to oversee the purchase of Macmillan Inc. Macmillan Inc. was a media company that would be McGraw-Hill, which is responsible for a lot of the elementary school books that you and I were raised on. Do you want to know who they sent to New York City in 1988 to do this? Robert Maxwell. He was in partnership with Robert Maxwell. And when Robert Maxwell would go on to die on his yacht because he owed the Mossad money, guess who he also owed about 50 million pounds to? The Rothschild family through the Bank of England. Wait, Robert Maxwell's, that's Ghislaine Maxwell's father? Is connected to the Rothschild? That's right. Robert Maxwell, along with Roy Cohn, had been running a corporate blackmail ring throughout the entire world run by the Mossad. And when he died, Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein took on the reins. That's why they had been introduced only 6 months prior to his death. After that, they would go on to infiltrate people like the princes, the politicians, and the media moguls that we know today. And we know through Alan Dershowitz, Epstein's lawyer through 2008 and 2009, admitted that he was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein in the early 90s by a Rothschild. But okay, well, we don't have proof that Epstein worked for a Rothschild. Here's an email from Epstein over to Peter Thiel. Says, as you know, I represent the Rothschild family. Maybe only represented a few of them. Maybe he didn't represent the whole family. Here's this wrinkly old pervert, Les Wexner, saying he represented the whole family. What? Okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Tag Howard Lutnick. I think that's what we could do, because I believe he's a Mossad plant that's currently being seeded by the Rothschild family in a place precariously right next to Jeffrey Epstein. All because he's his neighbor? Like, he just maybe bought the home on Zillow. He didn't. He bought the home in 1998 from the Comet Trust, which was run by the son of the World Jewish Congress founder and World Zionist Foundation organizer. Also before that, it was owned by Jeffrey Epstein himself. Well, just because he owned it doesn't mean like it was his house or anything like that, or ever lived there. Or, like that. Come on. Jeffrey Epstein would actually live there in 1992, starting right after things got serious with Ghislaine. So they would probably be shagging or doing whatever from 92 to 95 in that property before moving over into the other property, which will remain vacant for about 3 years before Jeffrey Epstein gets to pick his neighbor. It happens to be the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, who would profit off of 9/11, survive 9/11, and also then use Cantor Fitzgerald with his sons at the helm to profit off of the very tariff being shot down in the Supreme Court that he helped form. So you basically think Howard Lutnick is like a really high-level crisis actor? Yeah, I thought of it that way. Yes, that's exactly what I think. What a liar. Lutnick the liar, that's what I call him.
That was absolutely amazing. Wow. Who is that guy?
His name is God, I'm blanking right now. His name is Zach Faust.
Zach Faust. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he TikTok?
I think he's a TikTok. He does a lot of these videos where he's talking. That's like his style. He's always like talking
Awesome.
stuff. Yeah.
Zach
But
Faust.
you know, there's
That was
millions
crazy.
and millions of people looking at across X and TikTok today. And sure, it's not on ABC News for a lot of people, but think about where we were just a year ago.
Yep.
And then you think about all the different drops. I know you've done them with Mike King. It's one of Mike's biggest things to highlight is going back to 2017 and 2018 when Q was openly threatening the Rothschild family. We can hear you breathing and all those different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you started to see in 2020 and 21 and 22 things like Christie's of New York City, the famous auction house, the high-end auction house, having the first ever auction of Rothschild possessions and their famous hunting lodge or whatever it is over there. You start seeing their assets being auctioned off, right? So this all tracks with what has been going on with the Q operation, that they would have neutralized the Rothschild family quite a while ago. Again, we've all known about it for a while, but now we're at the stage of the game as you have everything going on. And he did a brilliant job there in a humorous way of connecting all that to everything that's happening right now with Israel and Iran. The only other thing he didn't touch on that we've discussed is the importance of Trump's move in the Strait of Hormuz and taking over maritime insurance from Lloyd's of London, because Lloyd's of London would have been an arm of the Rothschilds. The city of London was founded in 89, I believe, or 88, doesn't matter. And Lloyd's of London was founded in that location the exact same year, so 339 years of control. Everything in there ties together, and it rolls up to the Rothschilds. So it's just brilliant to see stuff like that circulating.
The Great Awakening, man.
Amen,
It is
brother.
in
Amen.
full swing right now. All right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I mean, I could ask you to, to get kind of leave us with some final thoughts, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've kind of laid it out for folks tonight, but anything you want to say in closing?
No, I mean, I would just say I hope that look, I can't say enough about the Patriot Underground community, the News Treason community, which there's a lot of overlap. I really do think that I've watched our audiences collectively come along over the last number of years, and really settle in a place where we don't have chat rooms and Telegram chats and Rumble chats anymore, where you have to shut them down and tell people to take a break, and people are fighting and try to argue each other, and that wasn't always the case, right? And that's not that is hardly because any of us here run a cult where we tell people what to think. In fact, quite the opposite. Myself and Patriot and many other people we work with are going to be the first ones that say, "Don't believe a damn thing we say." We're all here like you trying to figure it out. So it's not an echo chamber. It's not that, I know a lot of people in these chats watch a very, very wide spectrum of people. So it's not that we're sitting here telling people what to think. I think it's just the collective growth of having gone through this process over the last number of years and really learning to take that 40,000, 80,000, whatever it is, foot view and look at the whole thing. And like, going back to what we started the show with, really just remember that no matter what it is that's put on your television, and no matter how much it grabs you emotionally, just stop and breathe and then come back to it and say, how does this fit into the puzzle? How does this help wake other people up? How does this help get people to think for itself? If you really start to poke holes in what you're looking at, it doesn't become too difficult to sit here and actually start to analyze all this stuff. So I just think it's, I'll say this, and I know I'm not speaking for the people in this audience, but for others out there, I don't understand how you could even have watched the last 2.5 hours of this and look at, again, we're not proving anything, but if you actually have the patience and the eyes to look and the ears to listen and actually look at any of the stuff we're discussing and look at it and say, well, where were we a year ago? Where were we 2 years ago? Where were we 5 years ago?
That's so true.
I don't know how anybody could reach the conclusion that we're not watching one of the greatest, if not the greatest transformation and awakening of humanity that's ever happened, and especially in such a short period of time. So I'm comfy and looking forward to doing it again in a couple of weeks, brother.
Me too, man. Absolutely. And you're 100% right. That's one of the things that just struck me with what you said is that that's why what we do, and I don't mean just the two of us, but I mean really just the Anon community as a whole, is why what we do is so important. Because, like you said, no matter how something grabs you emotionally when you see it, you have to constantly remind yourself that you're watching a movie. You have to constantly remind yourself, like you said, or ask yourself the question: how does it fit into the big picture? And also for me, it's reminding myself not to allow the questions that I can't answer, because that's the way that my brain works. And this is one of the things I'll just say this kind of as a way of hopefully having it resonate with other people out there who may have the same problem. The way that my brain works is that I oftentimes hit a stumbling block in my analysis, when I can't war game the whole thing out, when I can't anticipate how they're going to tie these things together. What are the off ramps going to be? And I get so in my head about that stuff. And sometimes it has the effect of kind of like preventing me from doing exactly what we're advocating right now. It's just don't worry about how all of the different puzzle pieces are going to fit together, because we're dealing with the greatest military operation that are run by true creative geniuses who have this all mapped out. And there have been so many instances along the way. It's like what you said. If you go back historically and you look at where we're at a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there were always questions that we couldn't answer. But many of those questions have been answered in that process, in that time. And so just because we can't see it doesn't mean that they don't have an off ramp in mind, that there's not some other twist or turn some other road they're gonna take us down that's gonna completely change the dynamic. So I just kind of put that out there as a sort of a confessional of my own shortcomings sometimes in my analysis. And we all have them, we all have these points we can kind of get jammed up inside, whether it be the emotional toll that it's taken on us, just the passing of time. All those things are very real. They have a cumulative effect. But that's again why what we do is so important as a community of Anons coming together to analyze and to help each other navigate through these unprecedented times. And when I sit down with you, Dave, when I sit down with Mike King on a weekly basis, and Ricardo Bosi and so many other people, great Anons that I work with, it's like I always walk away with a fresh perspective. And a lot of the things that I went into the conversation kind of stewing in my head about, they just either I can let them go or see them through a different lens, or perhaps I get new insights. And for everybody out there listening, it's just so important for them. And this is why people love listening to these conversations, and they come in droves week after week, day after day, month after month to hear this stuff. It's kind of like, it's almost like in a religious context, you have to constantly, even though you've read the Bible, maybe you've read the word of God, you have to go back and reread it. You kind of have to keep that fresh in your mind, that perspective in a world full of, evil influences, to keep your eye on the righteous path, so to speak, saying that metaphorically, but that's really important. And it just kind of clicked in my mind. It's like, this is a big part of what the reason that what we do is so valuable, and why this had to be a military civilian alliance, that the military couldn't cover these bases. They needed people like us, and indeed all the other great Anons out there. I could sit here all day long and mention their names and probably forget people, but even the people listening in the audience tonight, I mean, we're all part of this process, and we're fulfilling a very specific and a vital, essential role in this operation, keeping each other focused. Because we really are, and it's not. I mean, Q told us no Anon is above another. Like, we're all on an equal plane, regardless of whether you have 10 million followers and you're kind of like at that level of a Candace Owens type of operative, or whether you're at our level, or even people who have smaller audiences. Like, we're all we're all on a level playing field, and we're doing incredible work to keep everybody focused. Because we really are going to be on the other side of this thing, and we're going to be in a position of leadership, to the likes of which I don't think most of us really fully understand, even at a local level, and some of us perhaps even at higher levels, because the world's going to come to realize that all of these crazy Q-tards were right all along. So it's an honor to work with you, Dave. It always has been. I can't believe it's been 2 years since we first sat down for a conversation, but they just get better and better, man. So I really love it. So in closing tonight, do you have any rants you want to read?
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me thank Alexis Sampson, and this username is Holden Over Soul USA 1. Each of them gifted a subscription over here on Rumble. Thank you. And then quickly over here on Rumble, Todd 12 with a $5 rant. Love it when you two do a show. Thank you both for what you do. Thank you, friend. Joe Rambo and friend came in with $10 gifting and Rumble. Hi, friends. Thank you, brother. Parkmon 1 with a $2 rant. Kirk's quote, assassination, end quote, galvanized we Anons and red-pilled hunters too. That's right. Alexis Sampson with a $1 rant, a dollar holler. Thank you. Parkmon 1, $2 rant. The full control crowd, y'all and everyone Q full control have simplified Q faith. Thank you, friend. I appreciate that. Logic and love, $5 rant. You two are on fire. Thank you, friend. Parkmon 1 with a $2 rant. We're all in college going for a degree in research and solutions. I've studied more, haven't you? Thank you, friend. And Dirk McGurkin with a $2 rant. Does Erica have the combination to Epstein's safe? Probably. And I think there's one more here. Mama C 2012, $10 rant. My OBS is that Erica Kirk is the hub of the wheel that connects so many theories. CT through NGO, child trafficking through NGO, orphans, Epstein, money laundering, evangelical church, infiltration of Republics, USA Pizza, her former boyfriend with a pizza tattoo, and I think it gets cut off there. Yeah, as far as her being a hub, it's kind of the same thing as we were saying. Yeah, she's a hub that I think leads to a lot of that stuff because she could rug pill a whole lot of people into seeing the truth. And Denise Volbrack, $10 rent. You two souls talking together is exceptionally calming. Realistic information for opening minds. Appreciate you too. God bless us all. Awaiting Texas. Thank you, friend. Appreciate that, Denise. That's it over here, my friend.
All right, awesome. And I had one here from Annie Chow, $20 rant. She asked, "Do you think going to Mexico cruise at the end of March is safe or not?" Any thoughts on that, Dave? I mean, I don't know. That's
I'll answer that. People have been asking podcaster that since like 2020. Just live your life, guys.
Yeah,
don't treat it any differently. Yeah. I mean, it's whatever precautions you would or would not use going to Mexico now. To me, it's no different than it was. By the way, what happened to all that stuff in Mexico? It's like we forgot about it, right?
Back burner, baby.
Right. Yeah. No, I would just use anywhere you travel, use the same caution you would at any other point in history.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, people know sometimes I have a problem with my rants disappearing. So that was the only one that I caught. So if I missed anybody, I do apologize for that. But great audience tonight and great conversation. So we'll be back in another couple of weeks. Dave, anything you got coming up you want to mention to the audience? You're kind of doing stuff on a daily basis now. So
yeah, there's the next show will be tomorrow night. Always our big Friday night show, 7 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, the open lines live, call in. So see you guys 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We had a great time, and we'll be back with you guys not next Thursday, but the Thursday after, and I'll be on Dave's channel. So looking forward to that. All right, everybody. God bless. Godspeed. Patriot out.
Take care, everybody.